Thank you. Good evening. Councilmember Newton.
Here.
Councilmember Bash.
Yes.
Councilmember Ullman.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman.
Here.
Mayor Grunmeyer.
Here.
Thank you. All present.
All right, thank you. So the purpose of our workshop today is for the City Council to provide feedback on recommended amendments and updates to our zoning code, industrial standards, that has been provided in the staff report by Lisa Wise Consulting and Planning Director Robles. We will not be taking any actions today. We're providing feedback for staff to complete the changes and then return to City Council with that final version for approval. I would also like to welcome our Planning Commission members today. Thank you for being here to provide feedback to the Council on this item as well. So with that, I will call on our Planning Director for the presentation.
Yes, good evening, members of Council, members of the Planning Commission, good evening. So, as stated by our Mayor, Mayor Grunmeyer, the purpose of this meeting is to allow staff to present our recommendations on the amendments to the industrial standards within the Gateway Specific Plan and the M1 zone. So, as the Council is aware, and as well as the Planning Commission, this is the result of the moratorium that's currently in place, and to enable staff to, so to speak, expedite before the moratorium expires, we've enlisted the services of Lisa Wise Consultant, and they have been able to assist us to draft our recommendations. We will be presented tonight, and the purpose again is for the council to provide some feedback, and at the same time allow our planning commission to basically listen firsthand what the direction of the council is tonight with respect to our recommendations. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Roger Eastman with our consultant. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Robles, Mayor Grunmeyer. I'm not sure who the chair of the Planning Commission is. Chair Hedges, thank you. I'm Roger Eastman, Director with Lisa Wise Consulting. Really thrilled to be here. Honestly, never been to Norco, and as I drove from Ontario south this morning, it was so noticeable where the city limits were. I left Ontario and somewhere in between Edenvale, I think it was, and I'm in Norco. This is a great little community, and I'm really happy to be here. What we're going to do this evening is just talk about why we are here. We'll introduce myself a little more detail in a minute, and the firm. We'll talk about the takeaways from the January 5th. Can you see, sir? Property owners meeting. We'll go back to the general plan. I'm a planning geek. We always go back to the policy direction in the community, right? See what that says and then think about what amendments we'll do after that. Then we'll do a quick overview of your existing code, and then we'll take a little more time to talk about recommendations for updating the code. And these really fall into three general categories. Formatting issues, which are relatively minor, but we can really improve the look and feel of the industrial zone. The uses will be major changes. In discussions with staff this morning, the recommendation is no more big warehouses and big fulfillment centers. We'll limit the size of those facilities, and we'll establish new standards, not only for new development, industrial development coming into the city, but also for any redevelopment of your existing warehouses. And then, obviously, this is your meeting, and we're here to hear from all of you. So we were hired to help you address these industrial amendments. Lisa Wise Consulting was established about 16 years ago by Lisa Wise. She's actually a CPA turned planner. So the thrust of our business is planning and zoning. I've been writing zoning code for over 30 years. And economics. And so we blend those two, which are really critical, obviously, for any community. We're here because of the moratorium, which expires on August 16th. And our schedule is pretty aggressive so that we can get updated standards to Planning Commission and then onto the City Council in the next few months. I'll show you the schedule in a minute. So we've accomplished a lot since we kicked off this project in December of last year. Got all the documents we needed from city staff, did a lot of research on best practices, had a very interesting meeting with the property owners stakeholders on January 5th. We had 9 property owners stakeholders attend that meeting. We drafted a recommendations memo, which I believe you've seen in your packet, and here we are tonight. On that January 5th Zoom call, we had a lot of conversation with the property owners and the stakeholders. To really summarize their comments, leave the code as it is. It works for the industry, for the warehousing, fulfillment center industry. They're happy with the way the process works in the community right now. Most of the developments are speculative, as I noticed as I was driving around this morning. And they wanted to keep the warehousing and distribution uses and keep the existing use tables as they are. So let's look at the general plan land use element. For the M1 zone, it describes this zone as providing orderly development of commercial and industrial and manufacturing uses that should be in harmony with each other and designed to minimize the effect of heavy traffic and the other operating characteristics of those uses. The gateway specific plan industrial zone, which you know is to the south of us here, is really intended to facilitate economic development of the city. I think that's really important, and to create an expanded employment base. Well, what does that mean? It's defined in the specific plan. Light industrial uses, for example, research and development, light manufacturing, custom fabrication, and wholesaling with related offices. And then there's a sub-policy that I think is also important, where we're talking about accommodating mixed-use commercial residential projects in the industrial district. So a very different vision in the general plan to very large warehouses. So as you know, you've got two zones in the city, the M1 zone here to the north and a smaller portion down on Commerce to the south. And then the gateway specific plan is generally those two areas. If we look at your existing code, this is the M1 zone, just a general table of contents. Actually, most of it is organized reasonably well. These sections that I've grayed out with the line through them have been repealed and adopted back into the code, so we don't need them anymore. We can remove those. The gateway specific plan is laid out in a very simple way with 5 major sections, which I think we can keep and update a little bit. This is where I'm going to slow down a little bit and talk about recommendations for updating the zoning code. And we'll start with the intent and purpose, talk about the uses allowed within each of the 2 zones, talk about updated development standards, and specific to the existing warehouses, updated administrative procedures, and then finally updating definitions. So we would recommend that you remove the vague statement like in harmony with each other. That's really difficult for me as a planner who spent 25 years behind a planning counter, as has Elmer for many years, to figure out whether a use is in harmony with another use. So we can rewrite that in a more objective manner. And I think we should emphasize light industrial and light manufacturing uses, consistent with the general plan, and expand the employment base by providing the right sorts of uses that will actually add to your tax revenues and the number of people employed in the city. So in terms of the use table, some recommended changes. Again, using the general plan as our guide, emphasizing light industrial, light manufacturing uses, research and development, and so on. Including research and development, custom manufacturing, fabrication, even biotech is possible. And we can consolidate uses. I was showing Almer some of the work we did in an Arizona community where we would, instead of listing all those detailed uses in your industrial zones, put them in broad categories, light industrial, and then define in the definitions what that is. Processing general, or processing light, or processing heavy. There's lots of examples, and if I could plug my computer in somehow, I could show you how we've done that. But that gets rid of long lists, shortens those lists in the use tables, and then relies on definitions to explain what those mean. I think you can consider removing some uses. Is concrete, gypsum, plaster products, paving products really something that the city needs in your industrial zones? talking to Alma? Probably not, but it'd be great to hear from you as decision makers about that as well. And then the big one here is no longer allowing the large warehousing and distribution uses that I got to see in a number of places in the community. Instead, let's focus on local serving warehousing and storage or light manufacturing uses as I've described before. And thank you to city staff, they pointed out this project just to the north of us here, the Town and Country Business Center. And I drove around there and took some pictures this morning, and then measured the largest building in here, and it's about 15,000 square feet. And so the general recommendation at this time, and it's honestly a little bit of a thumbs up and, put it up to see which way the wind's blowing, but if that's a reasonably big building and it's successful, we could consider a maximum building size of 20,000 square feet. That's permitted by right at the staff level. But if you go over 20,000 square feet up to 50,000, then you'd need a conditional use permit, and the Planning Commission would review. And if you go over 50,000 feet, you're not allowed. So we're throwing that out as a recommendation, and I welcome your thoughts on that. You can think about that as 15,000 square feet. Twice that takes you to 30. 3 times that takes you 45,000 square feet. That's a pretty big building. And I think the question for you in Norco, especially the decision makers, is that the right threshold for buildings, and do you need anything bigger than that? Then we can look at some of the development standards, and I'm going to run through each of these in a little more detail. The distinction we're going to make is that most of these standards here would apply to new development. And these standards here, with one exception, would apply to your existing warehouses in the event that they get remodeled at some point in the future, which is inevitable. When, we don't know, but at some point. So the recommendation is to retain the base standards. Your lot size, your building height, those standards seem to work, and we should probably leave them. However, we're recommending greater setbacks. And the City of Rialto has a really good model where, based on the building height, you increase the setback, especially relative to sensitive uses. It astounds me that you've got very large warehouse buildings next to single-family homes, next to churches up here on the hill. So allow a deeper, longer setback when you're against a residential or commercial or recreational type use. Increase your buffer and screening standards too. And there's a number of ways of doing this. I would suggest a very simple way is to increase the size of the trees that are planted. This is obviously a project that's been established for a long time, but look at the difference that it results when you've got large trees there. And I've looked around some of the new projects, and those trees are pretty small for a new project. It's going to take a long time for them to grow in. So start with a bigger tree. When we wrote the Rancho Cucamonga Industrial Standards, we recommended 36-inch trees up against the interstate. And the city jumped on that as a good idea. So that's something for you to think about. And then applicable to the existing and redeveloped warehouses in the future, new standards for loading docks and truck entrances to orient them away from residential uses. Increase the size of the trees. Increase the number of trees in the parking areas to provide shade. Adding more vertical plane articulation to break up these long building walls. We don't need to create architectural masterpieces in our industrial zones, I get it, but we can do a better job of articulating the buildings to at least create shadows or use color, darker colors on the bottom and lighter colors on the top. Similarly, using different architectural treatments to add to the building to give it a better design. A suggestion we found from the city of Manatee was make sure all the detention is underground rather than have surface detention or retention facilities. And then your truck access gate should be positioned a minimum of 150 feet inside the property. Why? That helps prevent those trucks stacking into the public right of way. Of these standards, this standard here for enhanced architectural treatment, I think should also apply to all new development in your industrial zones. What I pointed out, the Town and Country Plaza is a good building size. Those buildings are pretty simple. When you compare them to this building, which doesn't have a lot of detailing, but at least you've got a color band at the bottom that's darker than the top. And you've got some lines and other elements in the building that make this one a little more interesting. I think that would be appropriate in all of your new developments. And there's an example of what a large warehouse building could look like if it was designed with some different architectural treatments in there. And then also applicable to your existing redeveloped warehouses, think about a truck routing plan so that you know exactly where the trucks are going to be on the city streets and you can keep them out of residential areas. Make sure there's no stacking of trucks in public or private rights of way. Make sure there are limitations on drivers residing in the cab on site, because very often that leads to littering and other issues. Idling limits is a big issue for air quality concerns. And then finally here, well, that's jumping. This is from the city of Riverside, where they had a good neighbor policy that, as I understand, has worked really well. With a good neighbor policy, in their case, applies to buildings over 250,000 square feet. I think in Norco we'd find a slightly lower number than that. But it requires an air quality assessment, a health risk assessment, noise impact analysis, and so on, really to mitigate the impacts of these large buildings. And then also some energy and construction standards. Some communities go so far as to require only electric-powered tools during construction. I don't know if you want to go that far, but a number of communities in the Inland Empire are doing that. Increasing the number of EV parking spaces. And gets a really good idea as we see the growth in electric vehicles these days. And then increasing the amount of solar-ready roof percentage. I was talking with Alma this afternoon. The current building code requires 15%. Maybe for all these large buildings, you want to make it 20%. And really push that alternative energy concept. Finally, for the administrative procedures, for any new really large project that's redeveloped, remember, if you agree with this idea, there would be no new large warehouses, but if they're redeveloped, increase the noticing requirement to 1,000 square feet so that more people are aware of it. It's a very simple step to take. And then think about it as applicability under what conditions these standards will apply in M1 and industrial zones. And that might be relatively simple because it would only apply to existing developments or redevelopments of those existing buildings. And then we need to update the definitions. There's many examples out there of definitions, but once we agree on the direction we're taking, then these are some examples from Rialto that help define indoor storage from fulfillment center, from manufacturing grade technology, which we did in Rancho and so on. For next steps, we're here, middle of February, and our commitment is to get an administrative draft to Alma and her team by end of February, early March for her review, turn that around into a public review draft, get it back to her about the end of March, the beginning of March, and then we'll start the public review process in April. Fairly aggressive. We're really delighted to be able to help you get the drafts together for Alma and Lori to present to Planning Commission and Council. So at this point, Madam Mayor and Chair Hedges, I'm here to answer any questions from you and welcome any feedback from the Council and the Planning Commission and obviously the members of the public too.
All right, thank you. So at this time, I will open public comment. Is there any public comment?
Yes. Our first one is Henry Pyle. Is that correctly?
Yes, thank you. Should I stand?
Yeah.
Up? Okay.
Council members and commissioners, thank you for giving an opportunity for me to speak tonight. My name is Henry Pyle with Chartwell Real Estate Development. I currently have an industrial development project that's in the design review process with the city. We submitted months before the moratorium. Our property is located on Park Ridge Avenue in the Gateway specific plan. I want to start, number one, by commending the city staff, Lori and Alma, and I'm sure others as well, for getting to this point very expeditiously in a very collaborative manner as well, taking input from many different stakeholders, so I appreciate that. I also wanted to mention that Chartwell Real Estate Development is a family-owned, operated, and funded real estate development company, and anytime we're making an investment in a property in a city, it's for the long term. Everything that we do is a long-term hold. So when we're looking at investing in a city, it's really partnering with that city for the long term, and we want to be a good partner. We want to be a collaborative partner to come up with a development that ultimately is acceptable and works for the city staff, city leadership, and the community at large. And really, my only comment tonight is a general, high-level comment, and it's to provide some level of flexibility to the professionals at the city staff level, the professional planners and engineers, flexibility to work with developers to come up with developments, projects that work for the community and are still feasible on the developer side as well. Because a one size fits all for every single property. Every property is a little unique in large ways and small ways. Some properties are near the freeways, some aren't. Some, the path of travel is through residential neighborhoods, some it's not. Some have existing industrial uses on them, some don't. So the level of impact is different between each project, and there may be a case where an industrial development or a warehouse use makes sense at a particular property, and a one-size-fits-all stringent development code that doesn't allow that can potentially have a negative economic impact in terms of the ability to pay for infrastructure projects, development fees, community impact fees, and property reassessment on the back end, as well as great tenants, community-minded tenants. So with that, it's just to give the city staff flexibility in the code, and I appreciate the time from allowing me to speak. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we have a card from Rick John.
Stand right here.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. City Council, planning and staff, thank you for having the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Rick John. I'm with Dom Commercial Real Estate here in Ontario. I've been in service to the Inland Empire commercial real estate market for 42 years. Have completed about 70 million square feet of transactions in that time frame, and worked as an exclusive agent in purchasing land for the City of Ontario at one point in time, and also for the City of Colton, where they hired me directly to help acquire property and dispose of some property. I just kind of want to paint a kind of a broad picture of what the Inland Empire has done in this last 42 years that I've observed it, and what the drivers are, and the smaller building, we've obviously become known as one of the larger building marketplaces, and that's come about mainly because of the loss of manufacturing And really the loss of manufacturing is coming back to us through the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, where between the two, they're the largest ports in the world. 40% of goods that come into the United States come through that port. And then of that, 43% actually stay here in Southern California. And this marketplace here, the Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside County, San Diego County is the most voracious consumer marketplace in the world. And so, we just kind of said, okay, the manufacturing, we're not going to do it here. It's going to come offshore, and we're going to bring it in through the port. And what that has been accelerated by is obviously the emergence of e-commerce. E-commerce was accelerated by COVID, and I think probably between now or within the last 24 hours, I think probably a few of us have made a purchase through Amazon that expect to have it here in the morning. I know my wife's probably already done a couple of those, but those are the kinds of things that, and what needs to take place is a support of those kinds of products. I wish I could go and tell you that I've made of that 70 million square feet I've done an abundance, but the actuality is probably the number of users in the marketplace will occupy these high quality tenants. Probably have 95% in the distribution realm to support what I've just said, and maybe 5% less. And it's a little bit devastating to see some of the communities that have zoned themselves, like Europa Valley, Colton. One quick story, I sold Frito-Lay in the early 1980s. I sold them 23 acres for $5 a square foot. Wow. I just sold that. They wanted to build a manufacturing facility. They couldn't for various internal reasons and outside influences. I finally sold it for them 3 years ago for $3 a square foot. So in that period from early 80s to today, that the property lost $2 in value, and I sure hope that doesn't happen to my real estate or our homes or anything like that. So just being conscientious and thoughtful, which I know the community is, but also make allowances to support this distribution in the market. Thank you.
Okay. This time I'll go ahead and close public comment, and I'll bring it back for questions and discussion. So I'll go ahead and start with our planning commissioners. Any comments, input, questions of staff?
The only thing I have to say is a lot of what is has been shown we're doing, which I'm very happy about. A lot of the architecture we've already been looking at and doing on hand where you can see it. So I'm happy about that, and I'm glad to think that we are now, or we would hope not to allow giant buildings. I think some of the problems in Greg and I talked about before is the tilt-ups, which of course they make. It's cheap to make and fast to make, but then you end up with flat surfaces. So I think the architecture, like this one in particular, I think that's something we really need to look at if we're going with more of the industrial type buildings.
Anybody else on planning?
I just want to commend you on the package. I really appreciate a lot of the moves that you suggested here. I know that some of the projects that we've had, I felt that because our codes weren't stringent enough, I couldn't quite ask for what you're talking about. I like specifically some of the buffer zones that you're talking about with regards to these M1 zones in residential, because I know that has come up before, and I really would love to see that become more stringent. And actually, I want to turn over to Colin to ask about that. How does the adoption of this, the rules, how would it apply to projects that are in progress?
If the projects in progress have already received their approval, then they will be able to operate under the previous code.
Okay. I guess kind of the bottom line on this one is we're talking about Norco, and we really don't have that many pieces of property that this condition falls under anymore. Is it possible that we can be more specific? And I know that that is specifically one of the things that we're asked to do is to make it more flexible, but really we're talking about several pieces of parcel, and we can be specific about, hey, when it borders this street, this is what you need. Is that something that we're willing to tackle within this package?
Is that directed at me?
That's fine.
Yeah.
You're the
Yeah, thank you for the question. Honestly, that becomes a policy decision, right? And we can gladly write the standards for you in support of that policy decision. But what I'd recommend is, given what I've heard tonight and talking to staff and seen for myself, I think you want to be as specific as possible. And as I've outlined here, provide clear new standards for any new development in your R1 or, M1 or I zone. And then clear standards for the redevelopment of your existing development in those two zones. I think it's really two things. And from what I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's an issue and we need to address it, and standards is the way to address it.
And if I can elaborate, Jeff, I think that, while there are not many parcels yet to be developed, we do have many that are already developed, and we need to adopt standards, thinking 20, 30, 40 years ahead for those next leaders who will be here, and we want to have good standards in place for them. So I don't think we see ourselves doing sort of site-specific standards, but rather these standards that apply in either of those conditions, the limited sites we have yet available, and then also those reuse opportunities that occur in the future.
So what is our, hypothetical, what is our stance with these large warehouses that we have now, and what dictates that threshold of when does it become a redevelopment and are going under the new size versus, well, we're just shelling everything out and using the existing shell. It's going to be different use, but we're going to keep the same structure. How are we going to articulate that within the code and to have that threshold where a new applicant comes in and they're kind of catering their application toward that to be grandfathered in?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Those new buildings that are built or about to be built because they're approved, they're all there under the current code. I defer to the city attorney to see if we could add new standards to that new construction. My guess is probably not.
Well, I don't think that's Jeff's question. I think he's saying, what 20 years from now, what's the trigger to say, oh, the building use has changed, the form has changed, and therefore a new standard would apply. I think that's your question.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. You can do it based on change of use. You can do it based on expansion of the building or reduction in the footprint of the building if they're actually going to take something away. I've seen it done, and this is not ideal, but based on the assessed valuation of the building, and if the improvements exceed that assessed valuation, then it becomes a trigger. So there are a number of tools that you can use to force new development. The easiest of them is change of use.
Well, on that note, I kind of want to direct this to our city council who kind of represent our citizens. We're making this move because the idea is that we don't want any more large warehouses, but we do have some, and some that are going up right now, and especially what what you're talking about on how big of a industry it is for distribution in Southern California. And I used to work right next to Port of Long Beach, and I watched those things moving day in, day out continuously. So I definitely understand that. Are we going to put ourselves in as he was suggesting, a poor place in the market if we have these existing large warehouses, but moving forward years down the line, because of our zoning, we start reducing the number of ones that we have available through redevelopment and stuff like that. So that if a building is getting outdated, and they want to revisit either through they need additional electrical or new technology and stuff like that, where this becomes a hindrance where they would not be able to put in a large warehouse anymore on a site where there is currently a large warehouse. I guess to you guys, is that the way that we will go? Because I understand that moving forward, we don't want any large warehouse on these separate parcels, but where we already have them, how are we going to treat that?
Well, I think it comes to, when we look at all of the uses that could be included, what are the things that we're trying to attract, and would those still fit within what is allowed with the code, right? Because there's a number, if you look at all of the permitted uses that are in here, and we're looking at things that attract, for me, high-paying jobs and increase our revenue base. So if we're talking about just a bunch of logistics, which a lot of that is moving towards automation, I wouldn't say that that's going to create high-paying jobs. So are the uses that we're going to allow, or the changes that we're going to make, going to still allow for all of the businesses that we want to come? And if so, then I don't think that that's going to be a detriment. Obviously, with some more standards, it's not everyone's going to be, it's not going to be a one-size-fit-all. Not every business would be able to fit within that. But I think that's part of our general plan and part of the vision that we're setting. What is it that we want to be here in Norco, and understanding. There may be implications, right, and trade-offs for what we're looking for.
Looking at this all, it looks really great. You've done a lot of work, staff too. You guys been great. I go back to the roots right from the beginning, and we're here to serve the people. We have to listen to them. We're in a limited time. There's not going to be any more land. We're down very picky right now, so we can be picky what we want when we don't. Then, of course, you go back to the people that live nearby, the people that have to do this work. And this is the large buildings to me are just, they're done with in this town. Smaller industrial buildings, because we're limited to land. If we put another 50 people in this, even over the limit, we'd say it's too full. We have to make sure a safety part of it in this room, how many people we can put in this room. We don't have the land to put it. This room doesn't have the room to put it over abundance of people. So and then when you see up saying 10 to 20 years, believe me, that land, there ain't very much land left, it'll be gone before then. If that's the case. We're not having to think way out ahead because the land's going to be eaten up by the small industry even. But we still got to revert back to the people and what they came here first. The industrial part came later, many years later. So we still got to go back to the roots. And limiting what type of building owners, the first thing to do, should be smaller. It's really sad. You can see all the buildings from up top of the hill, the huge buildings, everything. It's not Norco. If we had a city with the square miles, like even Haruka, yeah, they can make a place where to put those buildings now because they haven't built out. A lot of cities did that, but Norco, we were limited, very limited, so we can be very picky. And I think the rules have to be extended out there, what we're going to put on it, and make an effort that passes. And we don't get everybody to get in the building, but we will. There'll be another big build out again. We're going to be in a limited way the economy is right now, but it's going to go again. And we'll be attracting, we'll be filling those little things. And pretty soon, there's not going to be any more land. We won't have to be in here. So that's how I feel.
Any other input from Planning Commission at all? Okay, so I'll bring it back for council. Who would like to start?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just a question. How big is the building that is off 2nd Street? That runs from Mountain to Pacific? Is it bigger than the 15,000 square foot one? I just want it for scale for me.
This is the one on 2nd Street?
Yes.
Okay, right up for the Palomino business?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that one, yeah. It's approximately, because there's two buildings butted up together, is that kind of what you're talking about?
There's one that runs pretty much the length of 2nd. So if it's two buildings, it doesn't look like two buildings.
Yes, it is two buildings. They're approximately, it's 60,000 square foot each. Yeah.
But it reads like the whole one.
It does.
Yeah, it doesn't look, okay. It's like, yeah. Thank you, that's just a comparison.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I'm looking through here and you recommended major changes. When we used to look at these building, these projects before, we always counted warehouse bays and doors to see how many trucks are gonna back up to them, to see how large they were. That's not a standard we're using. You're using just square footage. Is that correct? And you're thinking,
No, we can certainly limit the number of doors. The recommendation we had there was to at least turn them away from residential uses, park uses, and so on. And you can limit the number of doors, absolutely. And it's going to be relative to the size of the building. We're, at this stage, not recommending any new large warehouses.
and the reason I say that, because if you limit the number of roll-up doors and bay doors on a building, you limit its uses. You limit somebody coming in and making a distribution
Exactly.
building versus a manufacturing building. So that's just, I'm thinking about that. And the other thing, the difference, because we don't talk about it here, is the height of the building. If you restrict the height, you restrict the ability of someone to use that building as a storage or transient storage versus actually manufacturing.
Right.
Because we want to have light manufacturing that we want to do. We want to see them bring goods in, and like I said, you want to turn it over and build it, but you don't want to have, I get it here, so we're not looking to have a warehousing where it's warehoused here for anywhere from 30 to 60 days and then shipped somewhere else, because then you increase the trucking. So that was my thought on that. And Jeff's right, we look at things on a 50 and it's a 2-generation look at. What happens in 2 generations? These guys are sitting here and they're going to invest money. They know that everything changes in 2 generations. That what you built 30 years ago is a half-life. It's going to be changed. And today's economy and today's society, it's even faster than that. Things are changing. So, but I just wanted to know about the doors and we talk about standards. If Greg and I recall, this was on the accessory buildings. We didn't have decent set of standards on our accessory buildings. When we sat down in that subcommittee, we developed pretty good standards. And I think that stopped a lot of the problems we were having with people bringing in accessory buildings that were huge. And no longer were we Horstown USA, we were actually RV building USA. So I don't have any problem with good development standards that help. It helps everybody. It helps on the crew and helps things like that. So we put things through. I don't have a problem with development standards that not so much restrict, but help guide the planning department so they can make decisions so that if somebody comes in with some grandiose building, no, here's the development standards you have. You got to stay within them.
Exactly.
And that's okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Colin? Moratorium expires August 16th. Can that moratorium be extended after that date?
Can I, Alma, which, is this the first extension, second, first, yes, we can extend.
Since you had mentioned that you're on an accelerated schedule and trying to push this through, I just wanted to make sure that there is some breathing room so we don't miss anything. Couple of points, and I think this is more of a challenge for the Planning Commission, is if you recall, Gateway Specific Plan and you had mentioned key takeaways from the stakeholder meeting, existing use tables are appropriate. The challenge is to make sure you go through every line on those tables. If you recall that when we had a Lear group come with the 2 750,000 square foot distribution buildings, they had found one little spot in that Gateway Specific Plan that opened the door for it. So to me, the challenge is, I don't believe the existing use tables are appropriate, but you're gonna have to go line by line by line. And you take your time and do it right. I don't need to tell you that, Pat, so.
We'll do it right.
And some of this is just kind of little ticky-tack that I know will be addressed by the planning commission. Specifically on the use in industrial buildings, that Alma had just touched on it. You have these different requirements by taking your information from different cities. Here a while ago, we went ahead and all trees, public right-of-way, 36-inch box, all plants, 5-gallon minimum, okay? And I thought we had been doing that. And you have that from, in different areas here. You recommended a requirement for underground stormwater retention and detention. I thought that was a thing, that you had to do that now. So I don't know why we would be putting things like that in if it's already a requirement, either state-wise, county-wise, or whatever. Something else to look at. You have a note here requiring all building roofs should be solar ready. What would that mean? I know you know the answer, and you know the answer.
Well, the biggest thing I can see that now is they don't really allow gas to own the commercial buildings. So the solar would be important because you're going to have everything electric and no gas.
I guess if you're going to put together phrases in a specific plan like this, solar ready is
solar ready is
what does that mean?
that's a farce thing because you can how much I've been in a lot of commercial buildings that I inspected. Some of them filled every inch of a 50,000 square foot house, and then some, you don't know what you're going to be putting up there. There's not a maximum you get for a set much you're going to put up there. So a future, no. What future conduit, future what,
well, I mean, even that, it goes further down, that now you have to, your building department's going to have to look at collateral loads and all of this. So when you make a phrase that says solar ready, with no specifics, this is where we get in trouble every damn time. Okay.
So, Councilman River, if I may, just backtracking a little bit on the requirements for landscaping.
Right.
And yes, you're correct. The requirement for landscaping, as far as the 36-inch box tree, has been on a case-by-case basis. With Palomino, we did require it in the conditions of approval, and you are correct. What this is intending to do is to actually codify it so that it applies to all projects.
And I'm good with that.
Yeah, so that's a good observation. Yes, for we have been doing that as conditions of approval. So now it's going to be codified. So that's a plus. So secondly, as far as the solar ready, our California Building Code right now requires that, from my understanding, 15% of the rooftop be built solar ready. So what the recommendation here, if we do go above, we do make standards for 250,000 square feet, that we could go above the requirement. Of course, if we want to make that a requirement, but that would have to be codified. So if we don't make a recommendation for a percentage, then it just defaults to the California Building Code, which requires a minimum of 50%. And that 15%, of course, comes with all the structural and all that has to be analyzed, if and when the building goes through.
And that would be in the building code, Dan?
It is in the building code. Okay. So that's why you'll see so many of them above on the parking structures themselves, because they're so filled up there with, to keep that area, they can't do it. Depending on the usage of the building for. That's why you see so many of them on parking areas. Because that way.
So instead of just solar ready, we should also have a percentage of coverage that
I
we
think
want
it's
to order.
worthwhile to go above and beyond what the Calgary indicates, because there's a lot of loopholes in the Calgary, like when they're talking about solar ready and when they're talking about EV stations. It's EV ready, so all you're doing point is you have a conduit in the
That's
ground.
it.
And
That's it.
That's it.
That's
ready.
Be ready.
Yeah.
I know that
Where
well,
we may
Jeff.
want to say actually electrified.
So, and again, keep in mind, if we're going above and beyond what the California Building Code requires, it would have to be codified in order for, and that's,
Yeah.
that's.
So you could have percentage of coverage, but you could also like your kilowatts that you want, right? A minimum on that.
Yeah. But you'll see a lot more because they're eliminating gaps.
Right.
It's going to be a lot more, so you can't calculate it out, what's little going in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because what kind of facility it is.
It's just more clarification instead of general. You also mentioned like bike racks. Once again, I always thought you had to have those. So
For the California Building Code.
right, exactly. And one of the things that maybe we don't have this in our code yet, Alma, but we can have conversations later on height of masonry walls and things like that. But I think anywhere, whether it's a building height, a masonry wall, whatever, there should be a comma, and it should make the statement from finished surface.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
In every case, building height, wall, whatever, because we've gotten in trouble before of why is that wall only 4 foot? Is because I took the measurement from down in the drainage ditch.
Exactly.
All right. Generally, that's all I have right now. But it's going to be up to you 5 to do the first round. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, Kevin?
So you mentioned truck routing plan. One of the things that kind of gets tossed around, and maybe Alma can answer this, is that, for example, Palomino, the idea was they couldn't go down 2nd Street. We were then informed they could go down 2nd Street. That you can't enforce it. And we actually approved a project with the idea that no trucks would go down 2nd Street. And I kind of felt like the rug got pulled out from under me. Is there any possible way that you can actually make, we do have the one entrance on Mountain, but apparently trucks can pretty much go where they want to go in terms of 2nd Street and some of the other streets. I know that's why Eureka Valley, who's literally being destroyed by these things, is blocking roads off to Fontana. And so how do we enforce that? That's something that I'd like to find out. And also the no stacking. One of the issues that we have in the city of Norco, and part of the reason being in Norco for longer than the dirt's been here, is I have a lot of institutional memory. And what happens is we forget. For example, most people don't know that the Bluff area has a specific plan. It was lost, and suddenly some staff began to go to a general plan. So some of these things I worry about. How do we 20, 30 years from now make sure the codes continue to be enforced? I don't know the answer to that, but it's something I'll be asking. The reason we picked the 36-inch trees was we understood that anything larger would not root in the wind. And so, but that brings me to one of the issues again. When we did the Palomino project, I drove with former Councilwoman Azevedo and Patrick, and we went behind the Target Center. The Target Center is required per their specific plan, where it's butting up against a community. There's a whole bunch of trees there. They're required to keep that up, and they're not doing it. But that was the example I used that was supposed to surround the entire Palomino project. That project was built in the mid to late 90s. How do we enforce that? So I worry about that. Specific plans disappear. One of the things, to Danny Azevedo's point, and this is kind of the elephant in the room, the bottom line is that the people of Norco don't want these anymore. And if you had been an elected official in Fontana, Moreno Valley, Paris, Eastvale, and said, I'm running on a campaign to build distribution centers, I guarantee you would have gotten your mother's vote, maybe. And yet what's happened is through the back door, people are making a lot of money in areas where people live. One of my big regrets is that, and I worry about this, is that on 2nd Street we made a mistake with the Palomino project. And I've talked to Patrick, he admits it. We didn't understand from the rendering that the building was going to be 15 to 20 feet higher off the ground than we thought.
Yeah.
Had I known that, that building would have been 20 to 30 to 40 feet lower. That was a mistake, and it really upsets me because one of my guiding principles is I want to be able to drive by a project that I've approved and go, I did that. Now, even though I think we did a great job with that project, limited bays, every time I drive by that street, I go, damn, I screwed up. I don't want to do that again. And it's actually the only project that I've been part of that I'm ashamed of in terms of that one area. I love the project overall. Again, I was really fortunate to sit with Councilman Newton when we were looking at the Palomino project, and he was really good about the doors and the bays. That was very, very good, the height limit. One of the things that, and I'm speaking now to the developers, one of the mistakes that Alir made was they brought in renderings of Rialto, Fontana, the industrial areas of the Yorupa Valley. And if you probably remember, they showed 50 houses to an acre and then this huge industrial building. And we all went, this is Norco, man. And it was a huge mistake. And if you recall, we were all there, maybe 400 people were in the room?
Yeah.
And so I would just suggest caution. But for me, the biggest thing is the how do we make sure that we enforce the things that are ultimately built? And I guess the other thing too is I want to hear a lot about respecting this is where people live.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, truthfully, I can name 10 communities right now that have literally been destroyed because of these fulfillment centers. And I think that's all I have, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Catherine? Yes, I want to just express my appreciation for the work that was done here because I found this report to be very thorough and contain a lot of really good suggestions in how to specifically make our standards stricter to obtain the objectives. I live in the area, I drive by Palomino all the time, and certainly the feedback that I have heard from residents is we want to minimize the impact that these large buildings have on our neighborhoods. And so there are, I can give you all of my highlighted stars, there's a number of things, I don't think I read anything and I thought, no way. These are all really good tools that we could use to minimize the impact. I really like that you point out our general plan. Nothing in our general plan says that we are trying to promote warehousing and distribution. We're really looking at light manufacturing activities, we're looking at economic development, and we're looking at minimizing traffic. And those are the kinds of things that we want to attract to our neighborhoods. And I know that in the past, I've heard from my colleagues that we've looked at doors and bays and trying to kind of mitigate some of these effects. But regardless of whether the number of doors and bays is small, if we have large buildings, they impact our neighborhoods. And so looking at what else can we do to minimize those impacts. We are in Norco, we're between the 15, we're between the 91, the 60 is not far, Riverside County, San Bernardino County, we are in the top 3 out of the entire country for worst air quality. We already are impacted by traffic and particulate matter in our air. And so, when I hear from our residents, nobody is like, put more trucks on my street. People are, instead I hear from people who live in areas like Fontana who are now getting nosebleeds and have asthma or having issues because they bought a house and right next door there's trucking. CARB recommends that these warehouses should be at least 1,000 feet from sensitive sources, and so I'm really sensitive to our residents who are now their neighborhoods where they used to have a big open field and the chicken ranch, and it still felt very Norco even with those big buildings. The changes that are happening and wanting to protect those neighbors and protect our neighborhoods and protect our region from just being overrun with distribution centers. It's just not fair to the Inland Empire that we should bear the brunt of all that.
If I may comment on that, Mayor.
Yes.
Did you all see the Los Angeles Times article?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was very, very well done, and it hit the issues that you're raising, Councilman. really well.
Thank you. One more chance.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. And Alma, this is for you and Colin, whatever I do. We're talking about M1 zones, correct? And we haven't changed any of our area or on this list for permitted uses at all, and that's what we're trying to do here, right? So under the permitted uses on the M1 zone, we shall have warehouse distribution. Is that correct?
Based on the.
Yeah, on your page 19 of that, of your staff report. It says it's permitted. It doesn't say by a CUP or anything, it says permitted. And I thought when we started this thing, and early on when Lear was here, that was one of the things that was supposed to be changed into a different zone. And it's still sitting there.
Yeah, in the, this Lear is, was proposed where Palomino is, and that's within the industrial district of the Gateway specific plan.
Correct.
Yes. So, yes, that based on that determination that it wasn't what was being proposed was more of a warehouse distribution, the big buildings, but the city council, planning commission, city council made the determination that it was not an intended use for that zone, and what happened? The project was denied. So,
right, I understand that, but it's still listed in our M1 zone, heavy commercial and light manufacturing, as a permitted use.
Yes, in the M1 zone, which is separate from the industrial district or the Gateway specific plan, they're two different zones.
Okay, that's what I'm.
You are correct.
So, is it something we ought to look at or have planning commission look at to change that to actually remove
that's
permitted uses? Yeah. Okay, that's what I'm getting at, because it's still sitting here as a piece of review.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that we have.
The answer is yes, that's correct.
So, then the other thing I'll prep, and you're right, we just got finished spending 2 days with members of the Riverside County Transportation Commission. Kevin Tribe, City of Paris, today regrets the former council members. Huh?
I didn't name cities.
I know you didn't, but I sit on the board with Mike. They regret approving all those warehouses and distribution centers in their city, because right now they're paying the price for it, and their residents are. And I can tell you that the other cities along Highway 60 are also, the farther you go out there. It cost us in the transportation business and the highways a lot of money to build roads to handle all the truck traffic. The sad part, and this is future generations going through, is what we should have gone back to is the 1800s and put rail in to get rail instead of driving individual trucks.
Yep.
If we'd have done that and had a better rail distribution, I agree, they're not always the safest. We look at that now. But we would have been in a better situation on our transportation out to major distribution centers instead of using our freeways, which are not designed for it. And I'll leave that with the future generations going through this thing. We should have been doing that a long time ago, to include our public transportation. Rail is so much safer. But I'll thank you, Mayor.
So get on that, planners. Okay.
I have a question. On page 33, the Gateway specific plan layout, the commercial corner at First and Mountain.
Yes.
Will you be addressing that with this, or is this just going to stay M1?
That's why you're referring to this corner here,
Yep,
correct?
that corner right there.
That will not be addressed in because there is a separate district for industrial.
Okay.
Excuse me, for commercial.
For
And
commercial.
then actually, when we went through the whole Palomino project, that was actually reconfigured as part of the project, but that will be addressed under the standards of the commercial district of the Gateway specific plan, which is the red sections here.
And isn't that in the DA?
Yes.
Yeah, that parcel's in the development agreement. So
Okay.
that's the Palomino projects.
All right.
None of this applies to the Palomino project because they're within the boundaries of their development agreement.
Yeah, I was just going back to the Lear conversation that we had, that corner, that parcel. one of the things they were trying to sell with that, to promote the trucking, was to have wholesale fueling, right? And whatever else came with that. So that was just part of my concern if we would be looking at that.
It wouldn't be addressed.
Or you
as
can
part
just
of
give me
this
a
project.
follow-up on what we have for Palomino that's going to be allowed or not.
And again, that would fall under the industrial, keep saying industrial.
The
commercial district
right,
and the
right.
gateway.
Commercial,
Yeah.
Yes, and they
Yeah.
have the separate, different standards for that.
Thank you.
So thank you for your work, and I do appreciate that a lot of the things that this council's been trying to do through CUP and conditional conditions of projects is going to be included in the code. That makes our job much easier going forward. So I do appreciate that, and then to just speak, I think in general terms of what most everybody has said here, Norco's special, Norco's worth protecting. And I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our zones and our codes match that purpose and what we intend to do. So I think the more stringent and specific we can be, the better. If everybody knows the rules that we're playing by, it's just easier for everybody to, I think, get along and bring forward things that are going to fall within the rules and be better for everybody. So certainly appreciate your time. And with that, do we have any other matters? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will adjourn. And council does have closed session, so you guys can say your goodbyes and give your hugs and all that stuff and be on your way so we can get into closed session, please. Our public session, and we will take a report of actions from closed session.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The City Council went into closed session on the one item on the agenda. There was no reportable action. Council received a briefing from staff.
All right, thank you very much. So we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then immediately following that, we'll do the invocation with Pastor Michelle.
Good evening, everybody. I have been praying for you all day. I have, right? Absolutely. Like when I know I'm on the calendar, I start praying long before I get here. So God's got great things going on tonight, I'm sure. I want to read you this. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, I thank you for the honor and the privilege of living in a nation that is free. Free to worship, free to pray, free to meet, free to discuss, free to agree, and even to disagree. Tonight, Lord, we invite you to be present and to lead. Lord, I pray for Mayor Grenmeyer and for this city council and all present as they discuss and plan. I pray that thoughts would be wise and words would be gracious. Lord, I pray that what is good and just and right would always prevail. Thank you for the commitment and care that everyone here shows for our community. I ask you to bless them richly for all they do and all they give so freely. Lord, Norconians are so wonderful and unique in commitment to Horsetown, USA, and I thank you for that. Lord, please bless these leaders, bless this meeting, this city, and God bless the United States of America. Amen.
All right, thank you, Pastor, for praying for us all day. We can take all the prayer we can get. So with that, we have a recognition this evening, and we also have a presentation. So I am going to ask that for the recognition, my colleagues would join me at the front so we can do that presentation. So it says a recognition, which is good for John because we could have a roast pretty easily if I had to guess. So my script is very clear. So tonight, the City Council and staff would like to thank John Harper, our City Attorney, for 35 years of service to the City of Norco. John began with the City of Norco in 1988 and has watched many mayors, City Council members, city managers, and staff come and go. You've been here for the good stuff. You've been here for the not so good stuff. And nothing bad, just not so good. And we have appreciated and valued the time you've invested in the city. And we wish you well on your retirement and the next chapter. So I would like to give all of our colleagues, if they'd like, a chance to say a few words. But remember, it's a recognition, not a roast. So with that, I will let my colleagues go ahead and share a few comments. So we'll just.
Robin touched on it a little bit. You've been here for the good, the bad, the ugly. And so good we didn't film meetings back then. Okay. And when the room would be packed and we'd have sheriffs all over the place and it'd go to 1 o'clock in the morning. Those were good times. But with all of that, and I appreciate all the time that I've been able to work with you from years on the Planning Commission and certainly Council. The one thing that connects John and I is baseball. And John being a Yankees fan, myself being a Cubs fan, and John would always tell me that, and I would agree with him, that if you bought a ticket to a Cubs game, you were always guaranteed to see the bottom of the 9th inning. And so, John being a true Yankees fan knows that a bad day losing is much better than being a Red Sox fan. And I'm going to leave you with a quote, and you know who said it. Keep trying, stay humble, trust your instincts, most importantly, act. When you come to a fork in the road, take it.
I'll be nice. I can remember back, I was a young deputy working on Lake Elsinore. And here he was. He was sitting in, John Harper, sitting there with the city council working on there as their attorney. And there were some interesting people back there. Yeah, see? And he can remember the likes of George Alonji and all those guys. And then come in here and, wow. And here he's here on ours for years. Again, through the goods and the bads, through money and no money, we went through. Oh, you guys don't need this, you need this. But John was always there, always answered the question, whether right or wrong. He gave you an answer. And the good part is, I'm really going to miss this. I'm going to miss you, John. And I tell you, one of the funny things, and this is not a roast, this is actually thanking him. It was so much fun to see you and Jody hit here and argue over LMDs. It just really, because if somebody would test you, she tested you. And I appreciate all the time you come out there. So thank you for all the work you've done over the city over the years. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I was a member of John's favorite city council. I don't know, we go really way back. I mean, back to 1994. Stand up here and I yelled at you about the hills.
I yelled at you about all kinds of stuff. Little did I know I'd have to clean up all those messes as a councilman later on. As I'm sure Colin has told you, I miss you. I've really enjoyed you, and we haven't always agreed, but I always felt you had Norco's best interests at heart. I have no doubt that we are your favorite city, and I believe that. I'm not kidding. And I wish you all the luck, and I wish you well. And I know we're still going to have to depend on you for some institutional memory, and I hope you'll stay available to us. And I've really enjoyed you. Thank you.
35 years of service is a long time, and I think many a city attorney was fired long before they reached this milestone. So I think that speaks volumes about who you are, your dedication, your loyalty. Definitely, I've always appreciated, your willingness and your anytime I picked up a phone and I had a question for John, he got back to me. He got that answer to me. He answered. He did so in when there were heated conversations in a calm and professional manner. And, we all definitely miss you and wish you the very best, right? On Greg's quote with the fork in the road, retirement. That sounds great. So enjoy it, have fun, and we'll still be here anytime you want to come and visit a council meeting. There's a chair for you. So.
John, I appreciate the time that you gave a new council person and informing us and your institutional knowledge that you shared about the folks that I work for next door, your previous job before city work. And then the fact that I appreciated when we'd be in discussions and maybe an idea came up that was off the wall, or, hey, what about this? He goes, well, this is what you could do, but here's what's going to happen, or here is how it could potentially play out. And I appreciated that insight and being brutally honest with us but still allowing the council to have their say and make a decision and stick by us for the decisions that we made. Some of them were not easy, and Kevin always likes to talk about Norco luck, and we've certainly had our fair share of that. So thank you for sticking by us and defending the decisions that this council and previous councils have made. I certainly appreciate that. So now it's time for your picture with the council. Picture, it didn't happen, I guess. So if you'll come up, we have a plaque for you and we'll have a photo. Yes, please. Oh, no.
Dessert's in the back.
This is don't worry. Yeah. I don't trust it. No, this is not a speech. But I'll tell you what it is in a minute. First of all, but I've been around for a while. Well, yeah, that's right. Oh, obviously. Thought it was interesting. Paul, Hal Clark, Herb Higgins, Sullivan, Kathy Acevedo, Berwin Hanna, Malcolm Miller, and Kevin, Ted, Robin. I'd like to thank the staff because the staff really made fortunately there's so many that it's hard. All of you know that I've been so.
So our next presentation tonight, the City Council is recognizing February as Black History Month by presenting a proclamation to community members who have contributed to the economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development of our city. At this time, I would like to invite the family of Master Gunnery Sergeant Robert Reed, Pastor Monty Lane, for Pastor Fred Griffin, Wade Lockett, and Pastor Willie Oliver to come join me up here at the podium. And you guys will be receiving a proclamation. Right. So I'm going to read a few parts of the proclamation, and then I will give our honorees a couple minutes to say a few words as well. Whereas in 1915, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, a Harvard-trained historian, founded the organization known today as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History to research and promote the achievements by Black Americans and other people of African descent. And whereas in 1976, President Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month, calling upon the public to seize the opportunity to honor and the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. And whereas since 1976, every American president has designated February as Black History Month and endorsed a specific theme. Whereas the 2023 theme, Black Resistance, explores how African Americans have resisted historic and ongoing oppression. And whereas the city of Norco recognizes its local Black history and reflects on the strides we have made to ensure all citizens feel accepted and included. And whereas the city of Norco is a diverse community that is honored to celebrate history and legacies of African Americans who have contributed to the economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development of our city, state, and country. Now, therefore, I, Robin Grunmeyer, the mayor of City of Norco, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim February of 2023 as Black History Month in the City of Norco, where all citizens, past, present, and future, are respected and recognized for their contributions to our community. At this time, I'd like to call on Kevin Bash to say a few words.
I don't know if some of you remember, I know John was here. Master Gunnery Sergeant Robert Reed, we honored him my first term as mayor. And that was a time when a friend of mine and I, we were basically rewriting the history of Corona and Norco because it a lot of stuff got shoved underneath the rug. We didn't know that the first non-segregated naval hospital in the entire United States was in Norco. We didn't know that the Navy actually confronted the Ku Klux Klan in Corona, and we were trying to write about that. And I discovered that there was a man here who lived in Norco, Robert Reed, who was a Montford Point Marine. Now, I don't know if people know what Montford Point is. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Prior to World War II, Black Americans serving in the American Armed Forces was a very checkered history, and alternated between welcoming them when they fought, and they needed them, into service and banning them. World War II changed all that. The Journal of Negro Education stated civil rights were gained not in the name of liberty, but during war. A lot of people don't know that on June 25, 1941, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802 and opened all branches of the United Armed Services to African Americans. However, he allowed it to remain segregated. June 1st, 1942, and this is where Mr. Reed comes in, the recruitment of African Americans began. Initially, the first African Americans, they needed people that knew how to use a hammer and a saw because they actually had to build the Montford Point base. And it was just a few miles from Camp Lejeune. With the establishment of the segregated Montford Point training camp, the commandant of the Marine Corps, Major General Thomas Holcomb, felt the Montford Point Marines were a, quote, disgrace. Quote, if it were a question of having a Marine Corps of 5,000 whites or 250,000 Negroes, he said in 1942, I would rather have the whites. He urged the African Americans to join the Navy or the Army. Initially, white officers were in charge with the goal to train African American staff to lead the segregated units. By 1943, black staff began to take command, and those in command would later say, we as blacks were worse on our own than the white officers because we wanted to fight and we knew we had to be better Marines than anybody else standing. Understand that at certain points, black Marines would go out into the community and people didn't believe that blacks could be in the Marine Corps, and they'd beat them up because they thought they were impersonating Marines. The true catalyst for desegregation was prompted on July 17, 1944. Port Chicago, there was a disaster that killed 320 sailors and civilians, most of whom were African Americans. And then subsequently there was a mutiny, very famous mutiny of 50 black Americans. Thurgood Marshall became involved in this, and they refused to unload munitions in unsafe conditions. Interestingly enough, many of the wounded actually came to this hospital because even though the policy was segregated wards, this was really the only hospital where black Americans could be treated for burns. Up to this point, black Americans in the Navy were munitions loaders and unloaders. They were stewards, known as seagoing bellboys, cooks. Well, beginning after this, all of a sudden, this became national attention. My father fought with Montfort Point Marines at Okinawa and Peleliu, and he was from Compton, and he actually said, at the end of the day, you have no idea what color anybody is. He said, all I cared about was they had a rifle, they could fire, and they had my back. Unfortunately, the armed services wasn't desegregated until President Harry Truman, who overcame deeply embedded racial prejudice, as did President Roosevelt, signed an executive order on July 26, 1948, calling for the desegregation of the United States Armed Forces and ended 170 years of officially sanctioned discrimination. Norco resident Master Gunnery Sergeant Robert D. Reed trained at Montfort Point beginning in 1948. He once told me that coming from California, where he had faced little racism, he was shocked when he hit the South and was forced to actually change into the colored car, unquote. Robert Reed was an amazing person, and he spoke at one of my Pearl Harbor days, he spoke at a Veterans Day, and he spoke at this very microphone not that long ago. He retired from the Marine Corps in 1974. He served in Korea and in Vietnam. Some of his decorations included Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, Combat Action Ribbon, Navy Presidential Unit Citation with 1 star, Navy Unit Commendation with 1 star, Good Conduct with 1 silver star and 2 bronze stars, National Defense Medal with 1 star, Korean Service Medal with 3 stars, Armed Force Expeditionary Medal, Vietnam Gallantry Cross Unit Citation. The guy was a genuine hero. United Nations Service Citation, and the Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal. He was an amazing man. I hope some of you got to meet him at some of our events. I'm so proud that we had somebody who lived in our community and had that kind of history with them. He raised a wonderful family. They've all gone on and done wonderful things. His son is here today. And what I would like to do is I would actually like to present him with the 50th anniversary commemoration for family members. I'm going to give him 2 or 3 of them because he had a lot of kids. How many kids? 7 kids. So he was he did everything right. And so what I'd like to do is present his son with and then we have some pins. So there you go. We'll get him a bag. And anyway, I really thank the mayor for letting me go on and on about it. But being a Montfort Point Marine is to have one that was so gracious in our community and was so willing to talk about those experiences. And one of the things that we expressed when we named the post office after Kareem Nakui is that Norco does not forget. And I believe, after talking with the son and talking with Ted, I believe that he's actually eligible for our Wall of Honor here in the city of Norco. So thank you.
He passed away. Just a couple birthday is February 25th. Montfort Point was on the backside of Camp Lejeune. Had to build their barracks. Snakes. It's a very dangerous place. And they had to be better. The story that I'd heard when he went down from Boston, the ugly part of our past, he was there waiting for the Marine Corps bus, and he went into a store to get matches for cigarettes. Fortunately, he didn't know about the setup. You, so-and-so, get around back. You don't come in through the front. So he went around back. Him and his buddies were jumped, strung up in a tree. Fortunately, military bus pulled up. Hey, release them. Fighting for you. Well, you'll have them when we're done. Door swung open, 50 caliber machine gun came out, and they said, okay, you can have it. My dad has been through, as he mentioned, many battles, 7 children, not only 7 children, but he raised 2 cousins, foster child, and a friend of my brother's that went on to be Highway Patrol. Brother that was a fireman, lieutenant, policeman, brother that owns his own trucking company, brother that is a teacher at Las Vegas School of Arts. I myself am a car builder, worked for an electric car company, professor, public works. He did a fine job. We moved here in '78. And Norco was a little different town back then. It was a much different town. And we were probably one of the only few blacks here. He wasn't very well received at first. Been here for over 47 years. Little upset that he wasn't accepted by the legions. But when he got his Congressional Gold Medal, came and said they were sorry for the way they behaved. That was all he needed. He was a Marine through and through. And I did not even know the grasp of things he had accomplished. I just seen him as dad. My mother was wanted to be an international interpreter. She spoke many. We lived in Orange County. We moved out here because of me, because we had horses. My mother, from an agrarian lifestyle, from Texas, her dad being a Baptist minister, churches, recruited by a Santa Ana police detective named Joe Goldoni. Pick me up, bring me out here, ride these beautiful Morgan horses, and they said they needed a juvenile rider. I went from Morgans to Saddlebreds. And with his help, then he said, hey, you guys have so many horses, you should move out by me. He lived right behind the junior high school. So we moved, found a nice place right on Hillside where I integrated into the school. And without my help, I believe, Todd Gerhardt would not have been the running back he was. Because I was the one blocking for Todd Gerhardt. And when it came to running, you wouldn't know by this portly figure, but we broke a lot of records for Norco High School. And we made Norco our home. And not too long ago, I was going into the feed store, and a young lady said, well, we're patriots here. Looked at her and I said, what does that mean to you? She couldn't answer that question. And I said, well, Dad was a Marine, worked for the courts. My uncle was a Tuskegee Airman. My other uncle was a Buffalo Soldier. So, to me, being a patriot, is I care about everything and everyone within this continental United States. I don't care what political background, nor your color, as long as you care about this country. I was raised that way. Because of that troublemaker. He was a tough guy. He was a tough guy. He is a Marine. You look at Marine, you're going to see that face. We love Norco. Norco has been able to let us grow. And like my mother used to say to me, kill him with kindness. That's what we did. We just assimilated in. People got to see who we are, and I've loved to see the way Norco has grown. We came out here, there was very few blacks. It was the Wilsons, Willis, us, Johnson, Middle Eastern child, and like maybe 13 Mexicans. Seriously, in 1978. But now when I look around, I see Persians and Eastern Mexicans and blacks. This city has really grown, and it's good to see that. And I often think that if people felt like the animals they raise here, horses and the cattle, the dogs and the cats, they don't care about what color each one is. They just care about their content, character. I don't care if it's a roan, a bay, a palomino, black horse, or a chestnut. A horse is a horse. They see a horse as a horse, not the color of its skin. I think that's really important. More people felt that way, have a much better place to live.
Thank you. I'm here representing CCOD Church here, Norco, for Pastor Fred Griffin. Most off right now, I'm very humbled and I'm full of gratitude because for so many years, you know, African Americans was looked just forgotten about. You know, when you say Rome wasn't built in a day, you know, you can't put Black history in 1 month because, you know, for years and years, Blacks, Africans, African Americans, and all nationalities, it took to build this country. And I thank God that we're in this country. And I thank God that the changes in this country, well, we went from being a slave to being the president. And I feel very humbled being in the presence of the mayor, this wonderful man right here. I'm not from Norco, but I was born in Derbytown, Louisville, Kentucky, so I know all about horses. You know, the only from a kid up, the only place we went for field trips was Churchill Downs every year. So, you know, I know all about the love for horses. And, you know, I come from a very, very good family down south. And my father, believe it or not, was a country singer. He used to sing with Johnny Cash. And, you know, so I understand this town, you know. And on behalf of my church and my pastor, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for just allowing us here this moment and you sharing your retirement, sir, with us and giving us a chance just to say thank you. And if we are built as an African American community on love and as Christians on forgiveness, so we move past the past and move toward the future. And again, thank you for letting me share. And that prayer earlier was beautiful, man. Thank you.
That's hard to beat right now. My condolences go out to your father and your family. Congratulations. I want to give thanks to City of Norco and the counselor. I've been, by you talking about Todd Gerhardt, me and Todd Gerhardt was the one that brought me here to Norco. Me and him played together at Cal State Fullerton. And I had a chance to coach Toby. Been at Norco 19 years doing security, football, and also the head track coach. The last time I was here, I think Kevin remember when I had Shay Anderson. She ran in the Olympics, ran at won the state up in the 300, 400, and now she just turned pro. But it's an honor for you guys for me to receive this award from you guys. I really take it truly to the heart, and it goes with part of Black history. Matter of fact, my birthday was February 13th, so thank you. It really means a lot that I received this award. I've been knowing Robin ever since I came to Norco. A lot of people talked about Norco and said, how could you work there? And I said, hey, Norco had their past, but I'm looking at the present, and I've been there, and I know I'm from the South. We're born in Alabama, Mobile, so I know what the South is. So it was an honor to watch how Norco went from here to here, and it's constantly growing. And Norco is a good community. You guys really care. It's like I tell the kids that come from the inner city out here, just give it a chance. Don't believe what people say about Norco, because it's not true. Once you get to know how they roll and how they do things here, you will accept Norco, and I guarantee you will be a better person to move forward in life. So thank you, City Councilor, the board. This really means a lot to me. I love Robin. Me and Robin been, she's like my sister at Norco. I'm still at Norco, protect her. So we call her area the country, and we're the city down at the lower end. So it really means a lot to be up here with everybody that support Norco. And I want to give one more shout out to Gary Campbell. I had a chance to coach his last year when Todd Gerhardt brought me over. As you know, Gary Campbell passed away, I think, a couple of days. So my condolences and prayers go out to their family. And thank you.
Proclamation benefit. Here, we'll put this right here for you. All right, there we go. Tomorrow. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you all for being here and for sharing words with us. It's very impactful. So I appreciate you guys all. All right. Well, thank you, John, for being here. Grab some goodies on the way out. All right, so we are going to move into the regular agenda items, starting with our city council reports on regional boards. Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman.
For February 2nd and 3rd, I attended the Riverside County Transportation Commission workshop in Palm Springs. And on the dais, my fellow council members, I will, this my piece of paper. This is all kind of what we were thinking we should be looking forward to in the next couple of years of what to do there. So if you wonder what that is, that's what is our priorities that we need to do. And one of the things that I will tell you, it's one day we actually, after listening to him for the first half of the day and listening to people talk, we figured, and like anything else, sometimes you just have to go back to basics. So on Friday morning sessions, we went back to basics and just explained to people where your Measure A money comes from. That's your road tracks that you pay. Who funds what, how much is from the feds, how much is from the state. And basically, this is how you got to get it done. And it's surprising to see elected officials that have actually been there for a long time, that rely on their staff, that didn't realize where some of the money comes from. So all in all, it was pretty good. So I wanted to share that with you and my fellow council members. The rest of it, and then RTA, we're going to get our sustainability thing done here real quick and work with the city manager. We're going to send a report in. I know I had a good conversation with Jocelyn Yao from Eastvale. They also need help over there, so we're going to work collaboratively on that. And each one of us is going to put something together that's going to help our city with our bus transport. And then on the 16th, which is Thursday, I have my Riverside County Flood Control District 2 meeting, and I know we don't have any projects going in, but this will be finalizing all the new projects. And like Chad will tell you, a lot of the stuff, we have a lot of projects in the queue throughout the county and especially our district. And a lot of these are just catching up and making sure those funds are there for the catch up. Like anything else, our money is coming from our property taxes, but some of the state funding is not there as it used to be. So we'll work on that as we go through. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Alleman.
Nothing to report in regards to regional boards and commissions at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Bash.
I guess the most important meeting that I mean, there was a whole bunch of things going on with a bunch of stuff, but the WRCOG Executive Committee meeting and the RCA Executive and Board of Directors meetings, now put them on the same day. One of the things that came out in the RCA that was really, really important, in my opinion, is there was some kind of an argument about the purchase of a piece of land that was in the middle of an industrial area. And we were able to convince the board of directors that what we're doing is we're preserving land that 100 years from now we're going to be able to protect. And it seemed to sway, and we paid $1 million for it, but 100 years from now, this is a piece of land that our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren will be able to enjoy instead of the concrete that's kind of going over everything. And then I wanted to give a shout out to staff, particularly Michelle. As Ted knows, generally speaking, I'm the one that vets the people that go on the wall. And I've always worried that if something happens to me, nobody's going to do it. And she found somebody, vetted the person, took it to the committee, and I was so happy that I feel like it's going to continue, that the vetting for the Wall of Honor is going to happen. And so I wanted to give a shout out to you that I really appreciated that. And you were so excited and you did it right. I mean, you covered all the bases. And then the other thing with that, I'm hoping I can get with you in the very near future. We're putting 2 people on the wall, and if we can vet that quickly, it would be Memorial Day. We do it once a year, so if we can connect. And that's all I have, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Newton.
Thank you, Mayor. February 2nd, attended the special board of directors meeting for the Chino Basin Desalter Authority. And on February 9th, along with the mayor, attended the subcommittee meeting for our barn project up at Ingalls Park. Thank you.
Thank you. And for my report, we had an exploratory meeting for the Unload Committee, which is United Norconians for Life Over Drugs, Alcohol and Drugs. And so we're kind of revamping that committee, and we'll have information coming forward soon. I was able to attend an informal meeting with our folks over at the Eat Center and talk to them about potential workshops for weekends coming up. So that schedule should be coming out from the Eat Center shortly. Attended the Barn Subcommittee meeting with Councilmember Newton. And then on February 10th, I was able to meet with our state senator. And I am not one for meeting at City Hall, sitting in an office. So anybody that asks for a meeting with me, we get in a city car and we drive around and I show off this wonderful little community, because we can say what Norco is all day, but when we drive around Norco and they see what Norco is, I think it makes a bigger impact than sitting in the office. And so the senator was very grateful, and we did go up to the Veterans Memorial Plaza, and he did say now he knows why Kevin likes to brag about that place all the time. It's well worth the stop up there. So he was very gracious, and it was a good tour. So I'm glad that he was able to make the time and come see a little bit more about Norco. And that, yes, sure.
Did the senator commit to additional road money?
So
funny story. Circle D Ranch, which is the highlight of Norco, happens to be on Valley View. If you're familiar with Valley View, it's not the best road that we have in town. And I told him it's on the CIP plan and we're coming, but he did kind of make a comment about the quality of our roads. And I'm like, it's just this one. So we're working on it. So funny little story. But yes, when that looks good, then we're going to be driving all kinds of people over by Circle D Ranch. All right, so we will move on to our consent calendar, item number 2. Are there any items that need to be pulled?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to pull 2 Charles. C's Charles.
2C. Any others? Are there any cards or public comments?
No cards.
Okay. Perfect.
Motion to approve the rest.
Second.
All right, so we'll have our vote. Does everybody have their little green check marks? Yeah, no worries. Do we all have our green check marks up here, though? We had issues last meeting.
I have issues.
With your iPad.
Yes. Well, and others.
Oh, you're not logged in.
It won't.
It won't.
Hopefully it'll work this time.
Not logged in yet.
Just write your password on a sticky note. I heard that's what IT recommends. That is not the recommended form for password keeping.
Oh, and then
I did it earlier. I prepared. Logged in this time.
Yes. Yeah, because it hasn't. It hasn't shown up on mine either.
Okay. The only votes I need verbally is from Mayor Grunmeyer
Yes.
and Councilmember Newton.
Yes.
Okay.
The motion passed 5-0.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
10? No. Oh.
What's wrong with it? All right, so moving on to item number 3, which is our items that have been pulled from consent. Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman.
Thank you, Mayor. My issue is with 6B, the variance. They're there on South Fork. I'd like to have a hearing on that, please. If I remember right, it has to be a full agenda item, correct?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman, that's correct. Council has the ability to appeal any decision of the Planning Commission, and if it's on a variance or a conditional use permit, it's done by requesting an appeal at a council meeting. It would go a normal second with a motion, and then we'll schedule it for the next city council meeting.
Okay, with that, I'll request an appeal on the Planning Commission's decision on item 6B of the Planning Commission.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded for an appeal.
Please vote. Okay, and I do need to get verbal from Mayor Grunmeyer
Yes.
and from Councilmember Newton.
Yes.
Motion passed 4-1 no.
All right. Moving on to item number 4 is our public comment. Are there any cards for public comment this evening?
I have no.
All right, no cards. Moving on to item number 5, legislative matters. This is a second reading of Ordinance 1093, so I will ask for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We'll call for the vote.
Go ahead and please vote. And Mayor Grunmeyer, I need your verbal, please.
Yes.
And Councilmember Newton.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passed 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 6 will be our discussion and action items. We're going to start with 6A, which is our fiscal year 2022-2023 budget performance report. And with that, I will call upon Finance Director Free.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm here to discuss the fiscal year 22-23 mid-year budget adjustment. Just to give an overview of the purpose of our mid-year, here it gives us a standing snapshot of our current year, where we're at. We review our major funds to determine are there any budget adjustments that we need, as well as provide transparency to not only the city itself, but council members as well as the public. And it also starts the development for next year's budget. During our mid-year review, the original budget was approved in June of 2022. Here we just have a summary of all our major funds, which I'll go over in detail. But just to give you an overview of, our general fund, our ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, Measure R, Water Fund, Gas Tax, SB1, our supplemental law, our housing fund, and as well as our grants. Our general fund, which was adopted in June of 2022, was adopted with an estimated projected surplus of $2.4 million. During our mid-year review, staff reviewed our revenues, and we're expected to be at $1.8 million lower, mainly due to our planning and building activities that have slowed down in the issuance of permits of our major projects. However, due to this reduction in our projected revenue, we're recommending that we utilize our ARPA funding to allocate fire and safety costs towards ARPA that is allowed through our ARPA grant. With this, with that allocation, our general fund expenditures would actually be lowered by $1.5 million. However, overall, because of the reduction in our revenues and removing and reallocating those costs, especially the fire and safety to ARPA, our fund balance would still have a surplus of 2.1 at the end of the year. Yeah, that would just, with all the reallocation, overall, it's reducing what we expected at the beginning of the year to only go down by $214,000, and our fund balance estimated at $26 million at the end of the fiscal year. In general, here's a slide of our revenue adjustments. As you could see, the majority of our revenues is the building expectations for our major projects. The plans were submitted. There are here. They're just developers and contractors are not coming in to pick up and issue their permits, and that's where we're expecting the biggest decrease. Overall, with the rest of our revenues, such as our property tax, sales tax, and sales tax is our highest main revenue. It is expected to come higher than expected based on what we've actually received so far. The other one that also came in higher than expected is our motor vehicle in lieu tax, giving us about $400,000 expected more by year end. For our expenditures, this is a a schedule of a summary of what we expect to reallocate mainly to our fire and safety, to ARPA, and the rest expenditures mainly deal with our professional development, adding that back into our budgets. We're also including repairs and maintenance in our facilities and buildings. A lot of it has been done. A portion of it is based on emergencies and repairs that have to been done already during the fiscal year. Part of this also includes corrections to our vehicle replacement charges that when we adopted the budget weren't included in the original budget. And also the other item is included in here is the utility housing assistance, reallocating about $125,000 from ARPA back to the general fund. As for other funds, here it's our ARPA funding, trying to exhaust this in this fiscal year. We're not getting an additional allocation, it's just using the rest of the ARPA funds in this fiscal year. Measure R, also our revenues are expected to increase based on our actuals by $408,000 and expenditures reduced by $600,000. The Measure R adjustments were taken to Measure R committee in their last January meeting and have approved to bring those up to council. Our gas tax is just based on our state's revenues projections. They came out this month and determined that revenues for the gas tax will be lowered by about $60,000. Also for SB1, it's based on as the state's revisions, and that's being lowered by $21,000. On the supplementary law, we did that is based on our population growth rate. Based on this year, we have already received 65,000 more for the supplemental law, and so we're recommending that be adjusted as well. We do have a request for $100,000 for housing fund for contractual services. This was one also where it was brought to you back in the original budget. However, it did not end up in the appropriation schedule when it came to council. And then the other ones that we have are our grants that the city is expected to receive. It's $1 million passed through from the county of Riverside, $800,000 federal funding through Kevin Calvert's office. It was an initiative through their office, and also $3,000 for our healthy agents through Parks and Recs grant. We do have one other item I want to speak about is regarding our PARS ongoing contribution, where once the financial statements are audited, we come back and council decides on a percentage of our surplus to allocate to the pension trust. We want to bring that back at a later date and bring not only that, but also our reserves policies that we have to sort of make sure we identify what the city's needs are for the future and to bring that all at one time. And with that, I recommend that we adopt Resolution 2308 with approving our mid-year adjustments. And if you have any questions.
All right, thank you, Director, for your report. Council, do we have questions of staff? And I'm going to go ahead and start over here to my left. So, Kevin, any questions?
I don't really have any questions. I guess just a statement. I was a little nervous when Andy left because he put us in this position. But I have to tell you, Lisette, your work is just incredible, and the way you have, I understand that some of the revenues didn't come in when they were supposed to, and the way you've creatively budgeted so that we're still coming out on top is just extraordinary, and To Greg, I remember when we had nothing in the bank. Now we have $26 million, and our big goal was 10. And when we got there 4 years later, we were like, we got $10 million. So well done. Thank you.
That's all the departments.
Of course, it goes without saying.
No questions. I had questions and I was able to get them all answered beforehand. So just want to thank your staff and our city manager for the recommendations and the adjustments that were made to keep us in the black and making good financial decisions for our city and its residents.
Thank you. Councilman Newton.
Appreciate you and staff's work. On this $100,000 for the housing consultant, is that out of the fund, the housing fund that use it or lose it?
Yes.
One?
Yes.
With the state? Okay. I think just, and maybe it just needs more explanation, my concern is that where we're taking the funds from the Recovery Act and backfilling public safety, sheriff, and fire, that what happens next year?
Next year, we're going to have a balanced budget.
Well, because I mean, then I look at what we're doing with Measure R, and that is one of the tenets of Measure R, to prevent public safety cuts. So the cost for sheriff and fire are going to go up, and I think it's just my concern down the road that we're using these one-time funds to backfill today.
Yeah, and one of the items that we've discussed with the city manager is when we have major projects that are coming to the city, them as part of our general operating fund, and sort of set those
Right.
aside to prevent that in the future.
And I think I know where you're going to go with this, but it just more of a clarification and a reassurance.
Yes, I think it's an excellent question to bring to the public, because I know you and I spoke about this previously, but I think to clarify for everyone. So the ARPA funds came to the cities by formula, right? And it is a one-time source of revenue. So normally, you're absolutely right, we would not look to use those on one-time expenditures. But in this case, there's a specific kind of limit on how those funds are used. It's this general government operations, and then only very specific narrow windows of uses that frankly would not likely apply to us. So the best way for us to maximize the use of those dollars is to spend them on some general operations such as police and fire, which is clearly 100% eligible. That results in effect in savings in the bottom line. So where Lisette says we'll be balanced next year, she's not being facetious. She's spot on, because using those funds doesn't just balance us, it leaves us with a surplus of $2.1 million. So we've used those funds effectively and effectively freed up general fund money then to be used at the discretion of the council. So it's a wise thing to do. It doesn't put us in a deficit position next year at all. We're going to be just right where we are. Now, to your point with regard to where we go long term, I think the city has been very fortunate with the passage of Measure R, kind of coincided at a time where other sales tax grew, and that Measure dollars really has only been used for capital, which has been amazing, right? We've had a lot of capital needs. Over time, as public safety costs grow, we might be revisiting those recommendations over time. I don't think that's happening next year, but is that possible in the future? Yes, I do. We know, for example, that CAL FIRE is moving to a different sort of personnel structure. They're adding folks at the stations. They're changing their pay schedules to be more competitive with the local agencies. That will increase some costs. And then we, of course, as the community grows and builds, there will be additional sheriff's needs too. So over time, to your point, I think we'll have to be carefully looking at that over time, for sure. So yeah, to your point though, the committee, we are in excellent financial shape. We're not using the ARPA dollars because we have to on the sheriff. We're doing it because it's a prudent use of those monies this year.
if we didn't use those funds, what fund would we use?
The general fund, and but you wouldn't have a surplus.
Right.
You would come out even. You'd be balanced, but you wouldn't have a $2.1 million surplus. You'd have a $500,000 surplus.
Now, also the ARPA funding does have, they need to be encumbered by, I believe, of December of 2024 and must be exhausted before we have to turn
Just like we
any money
find with
back.
the housing fund,
Right.
that we have to encumber certain percentages.
Correct.
With that.
And because it is federal funds, as a staff, our preference is to move that off our books quickly.
Correct.
So we can settle any avoid any further years where we're required to do a single audit, which is just another hoop, another thing we have to spend money on when we have federal funds over a certain threshold.
So then, and it's just being concerned what's going to happen the rest of the year and into the future, and not going to get better for quite a while, I think. But so I'm looking at some of these, measure our expenditures that are decreases. And these were, if I remember correctly, these were approved projects. They're carryover projects that we're just not going to be able to get to this year.
Correct.
Is that generally?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So not exactly. What we're doing is we're recognizing the expenditure that's actually going to occur in the year. So most of those projects have a design element and a construction element. So we're recognizing the part of the project that will actually happen this year. So the staff's gone through on some of those and said, okay, the examples fail me right now, but there's some where we are moving. Essentially what you're doing is you're going to take that chunk of money and budget it next year because it's not going to get spent in the current year. But Amanda or Chad and those folks have plans this year they're working on. There's pieces of it that are happening in the current year, but then the rest of it's happening in the next budget year. So it's a better budget practice to recognize that expenditure in the actual years that they're going to occur. So we're not deferring any projects or not pursuing the projects the council has directed. Those are still on target and happening.
Okay. And maybe I'll qualify by saying, like, I'm not blaming fault, and certainly not fault of any current staff. Okay. But City Hall Sheriff Substation improvements, $250,000. And correct me if I'm wrong, this has been a carryover for at least a couple of years. And I always considered this a high priority. And we can't get to it. I'm just worried about the time, because this is a longer carryover than drag Amanda up here. But I think Berwin was mayor at the time when we first started talking about this.
The substation project, it includes a security in front of City Hall, the lobby project. So we are in design right now. I did notice something, that when we came on board, there was a section of front counter space that was actually missing. So we're going back, but also with the assessment project that I proposed this last year to you about how we're going to go through City Hall and see the different offices and how we can maximize the space that we have. It's kind of molding into one project just to do it efficiently, right? So if we make those changes in the front, how is it going to impact the back? So we kind of, we're looking at a whole project now, and we're working with the architect currently on moving forward.
So let's say this has been on the books and the funds have been approved for 3 years, and we're just starting design now.
The design is probably about 80% complete. There's just some things that I saw that were wrong with it that I wanted to bring up and to have the architect redesign some elements to it, but also take into consideration the assessment plan, which she is also doing for anything that might affect that project, the substation.
And are the design costs in this $250,000?
Correct. It's not that much. The design cost for the assessment was roughly around $25,000.
So is that accounted for in the 250?
Yeah.
I mean, we're taking out the whole 250, so
No, you're taking
We're-
out a piece of the project. That
Okay.
what's being spent in the current year is still staying in the budget.
all right.
We still have money to complete the design, anything else that is impacted by it, but the real construction would be next year, next fiscal year.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman.
Thank you. I had the same angst and worry that my colleague, Mr. Newton, had over here. And when I see a decrease in Measure A funding for projects that I know needed for 2 or 3 years, especially when I look at the Marino Arena and the lights and Nellie Weaver Hall and those fellows up there. So I actually sat down with the city manager and she explained to me what you were doing. So I didn't have a heartache anymore, but it is scary. And when we take our funds, and one of the things that I saw was for their audit, for the people out there in the public, our community development fees. You know, we had budgeted $4.8 million for last year, and because of adjustments or things that's not coming through, buildings not coming through, that got dropped down to $2 million. So we lost, correct me if I'm wrong. So we lost 2.8 million. So we have to make up those community development fees, and those are fees that we use to actually build stuff in town, and do in certain projects. And with that, I understand why we're using the American Rescue Plan fees, not just to cover that thing, but instead of taking money out of general fund, which we don't have, or that we had allocated for it, we're using this. And I agree. I don't like using one-time funds. And until she explained it to me, because my big thing is for sustainability. When we have a project, and you can ask me wrong, is this will sustain us, correct? As far as making sure we don't have a reduction in our public safety. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so what we're going to do when you do the budget in June, we're going to allocate that some of the funds that we thought we were going to get out of community development, and we're going to do a better planning on that. So we may see a reduction in that for the 23-24 budget, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so those will be able to adjust, so they won't have this thing. And I understand that our plans are going to be similar to it. And I don't know if Chad, when you were on, when you first got here, didn't we used to do a 5-year CIP and we have these projects done, correct?
Not really. We really only did where there was funding available. We kind of showed you water and sewer. Highlight we had such a deficit in water fund, but a lot of projects, but 5-year for all our various funds. Kind of focus on a year because deal with every
Okay, well, maybe.
elements where we had this designated funding, we could do that. Like Measure A, it's there. Water, we could do projected out, but most of the other
All right. But if I was to go on your CIP budget and look at your map plan, you have those mapped out for years where you show design and you show build out, correct? In the years?
No, actually, we don't. It's 1 year at a time. Our goal actually coming for this fiscal year work on is actually develop a true 5-year schedule that we can plan out all the roads, buildings.
Okay.
And we're going to work close that to make sure we projections for the public's benefits. We know beyond a year.
Okay, but you do break it down where you show a design phase, some of your projects, where you show the year, and then you kind of look and say, we're going to probably start this plan in a year or so on for the actual construction, correct?
Right.
All right, that's what I'm on that one. So I whether it helps us out budgeting, we're certainly going to help us out for future projects. I guess my main thing is the way your budget here, and after sitting down with city manager, I get a better understanding with it. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it at first. And so she knows I walked in there and book an egg, or what are we doing here? I mean, to have a project, especially I'll look at the lights up at Marino and go, again, we got the lights dumped at Marino again? Why? now I understand it a little better, and we're going to put this thing so we have it. But, you know, I really want to get those lights in by sometime in 24 year. So it helps to go through and talk to her about and where your project is. We got spoiled with Andy, we really did, and how he did it, and everybody did, because he should have been Scotch. He's so tight with his money, but he always had that way of doing that. And I give you credit, Lizette. I think either you rubbed off on him or he rubbed off on you, because you don't get crazy with this thing. I'll give you credit for that. So hopefully we're doing the right thing, and I'll go through. You already scared me, so don't scare me anymore. Okay, thanks.
Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
If I can also add to this discussion too, I would turn your attention to page 268 of your packet. And this may answer to Councilmember Newton and Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman's questions. This is showing all those projects in Measure R and the amount that is remaining in this year's budget that's the departments have said are their estimated actuals for this mid-year. So you can see in here each of those projects and then their total budgets. So this may help you see what we're expecting to spend. Again, we're just trying to true up to what we're actually going to spend in the current year. And the concept, the better practice with regard to carryover is actually like a technical accounting term related to what money has been encumbered in the current year, and that when you carry over that encumbrance into the next year, that's referring to the fact that you've actually encumbered dollars. Historically, we've not used that term that way. We've meant carryover as in it's a multi-year project, right? And so now we're going to do it. We're going to just finesse our approach a little better and phase those dollars over into the correct years. Carryover will only be when truly a construction contract is encumbered in one year, continue to the next, and that full amount of that contract is encumbered in the first year and carried over in the sense. So it's just a change in how we do things that will provide for, in the end, smoother budgeting, because you won't be having these big lump sums in the front end that you know will never get spent in the current year, which is confusing. So it'll smooth over. And to Chad's point, Chad and Amanda and the whole team are committed to giving you a true 5-year CIP this coming year. They're excited to do it. They are all brainstorming and working on it for you. It's going to give you a lot of planning certainty and clarity, because you'll know 3 years from now if Valley View is getting done, right? From where to where. We'll literally have the dollars, resources matched up with those specific plans and just be stepping through those every year. So it'll be a good tool.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Lizette, for your report. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and open public comment. Do we have any cards?
No cards.
I'm going to close public comment, bring it back to council for discussion and action.
When you talked about your Measure R, I think what, Lori, that got my attention was that we were carrying $16.5 million in the budget, and now we're down to 4 and change. So I appreciate your explanation on that, but it's just some of those projects, and I think it goes back to this eternal carryover that we've experienced, for years. And,
I can see how that's frustrating.
And the frustration.
Yeah, I can see that frustration. I can tell you the other thing that we're working on as a team is that I'm trying to think of the right analogy. We can allocate $100 million, but if we don't allocate the resources to execute on those projects, they're not going to get done, right? So we're working as a team as we think about the next future year, how we can augment our team with our experts that we have at RKA, at Wildan, to have manage projects and get them through, because our team is small. So then there's a place to do that. We need human beings to move these things through. I know we've talked about I'm not looking to add any full-time staff next year. I don't think that's prudent, but we can bring other resources to bear to move more projects through the pipeline and kind of cure some of that backlog and that frustration. But it has to be both. It's dollars to construct, but we need people to manage, plan, design, execute on the projects.
Or are we planning too much?
Yeah, it's either way, right? It's either one or the other.
I mean, Valley. What else is there to say? I mean, that's dragged on for years. But maybe that's something we need to look at as council, is maybe we're asking for too much.
That's a really interesting point, and maybe as a team we can, as we go into budget, give you some options. Like, here's what we think we can do. If we allocated a little more consultant money, we could do this much more, right? And we can try to calibrate on our end more thoughtfully about what we can realistically execute on, keeping the fact that there's always the dumpster fires that happen during the year, right? That always happens, that takes some of our time.
Right.
That's a really insightful thing that we can noodle on.
Or maybe a starting point is what we can do with staff. Then the next is what we can do with consultants. Okay? Because I think we need to be very prudent and watch our dollars here in the near future.
I think that's great.
Chad, I can't approve your appropriation of $900. You got to do a lot better than that, buddy. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other council discussion?
Sure, I would just add one of the things we were looking at, right, was in part of our strategic plan is kind of our overarching picture of priorities, and coming up with kind of clear priorities for where the dollars go, so that when we have these questions of here are our options, it gives a path forward for, well, here's what's going to come first, right? We're going to focus on these things first when we're looking at Measure Our Money, or we're looking at big capital improvement projects. Where are we, as a council, strategically trying to prioritize what areas to kind of streamline us through these questions. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2023-08.
We have a motion and a second. We'll call for the vote.
Go ahead and vote, please.
It came up. Scary part is I figured it out myself, so yeah.
You have, but you haven't voted yet.
Pardon?
Vote?
Oh, no, yeah, but it's off yet. So put your finger somewhere else on the screen.
Oh,
Okay, now,
on a different one.
no, put your finger over off the box somewhere for a hot minute.
You can do it, Greg.
No. Yeah, it was up, but he had a copy paste over it. So
May I get your
Next
vote,
one.
council member?
Yes.
Yes. Very good. Motion passed. 5-0. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry. Let me try that again. Okay. 5-0.
next time. All right. Item 6B is consideration of the city's legislative platform for 2023. And for our report, I'll go ahead and call on our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Grenmeyer. And before I start, I do want to thank you and echo your kudos for Lisette. She's amazing and works super hard and is super bright and takes really good care of us. So thank you, Lisette, for your just super work and keeping us all on target. So we appreciate you. Okay, so in consideration of the city's legislative platform for 2023, so you, council members, you have before your resolution that would approve a legislative platform for calendar year 2023 for the city of Norco and authorize actions in support of the platform. So as we've noted in the staff report, the council and has generally been pretty active in participating in legislative advocacy around a variety of topics. We also have a state legislative advocate that we've retained to work on behalf of the city and represent us. So, you know, through the years, there's always sort of issues and things that come up with regard to legislation. And I think the city has had various practices to address that over in the past. And what we're recommending at this point now is the city sort of formalize those practices and adopt an actual legislative platform to guide those activities during the year. So the platform establishes the city's legislative priorities and is really rooted in the city's mission, vision, and strategic plan. So the resolution and the platform attached is meant to be a statement of the city's official positions on these various legislative issues for this legislative year. And what we've attempted to do here is sort of put these in broad buckets because it's very difficult to anticipate every single thing that someone might think is a grand idea from one of our state or federal layers of government. So it's meant to give us some broad buckets of concepts. For example, obviously we are in support of anything that promotes rural living, agricultural lifestyles, our equestrian pursuits, and so forth. And we're generally opposed to things that would not promote those, right? So that's kind of a bucket. We can't really predict what will come in that bucket, but that's the idea. So once the platform is adopted, if you choose to adopt it, then as legislative proposals come forward that are consistent and supportive of the city's legislative platform, we can draft letters of support for the mayor's consideration and signature. And conversely, if there's legislation that we feel is adverse to the city's platform, we can draft letters in opposition. Then there's other kinds of advocacy. Often we'll be asked to make calls, or you'll be asked to make calls to legislators. We'll make calls to their staffs to talk for or against or about issues. So again, this provides some clarity around what our positions are when we're working in behalf of the city. I would also note that we will have to, of course, be needing to keep the council in the loop of all those actions. So if the mayor does sign a letter in support or opposition, we'll make sure all the council members get that. And we'll implement a tracking mechanism internally to share that out with you on a regular basis so that you can know. This is not meant to preclude any council involvement or discussion, but rather sometimes things are hot and we need to get something done quickly, and it just provides that opportunity for us to do that on the city's behalf. So resolution 23-09 sort of outlines that platform. I won't go through that with you. You've had a chance to read it. But I would suggest if you have any additions or changes, perhaps, Mayor, you might want to talk about that now. We can go through that and make some modifications. But this would be a nice tool and allow us to be more deliberate in our activity in both Sacramento and Washington, D.C. So.
Thank you for your report. Does council have any questions of staff? I'll start to my right this time with Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman.
Yeah, thank you very much for doing this. I guess my question is, so once we get this, we put our wish list together and everything, a copy of this can be sent to our congressman and our state senator and our state assembly person so they understand where we as a city are coming from and things that we support.
Yeah, absolutely. And a number of the agencies around us take this, this Word document I've given you and turn it in sort of like a glossy 2-page color version that, is a little more attractive. And we could definitely provide that out.
Well, something they're going to read.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason I say that is because Sacramento and the rest of the state have a separation. They don't talk very well up there, those guys. Once they get up there, they forget how they got voted to get up there. So I just want to make sure they still understand where we come from here. And that's, and along with our supervisors, even though Karen is very good, she communicates us very good. Sometimes it's good to see the board now is a 3-2 where it used to be a 2-3. So that it's a difference. So we can, at least she'll have something. Her constituents, they need to know like we are a part of that, and so unless somebody has something else to say, but I think it's important that they understand where we're coming from as a city. So thank you.
Great. Councilmember Newton. Okay, perfect. Councilmember Alleman, questions? Councilmember Bash, any questions?
I just had a question. I was looking to see if you had anything about the RTRP on here as they come up.
Yeah, 2A. Is advocating funds for full undergrounding of RTRP.
And then the new bill that's coming forward with the change in fees, I can't remember the number of that.
Correct. That is the Business Roundtable Initiative, the 2024 initiative. That would really fall under 1A or B. It's not specifically on here, but we could add it. That's a really good point.
I'd like to add that. I mean, do we need to discuss that? Is everybody aware of it? Is that something we have to agendize?
Well, it's coming back to you at a future meeting to take adopt a resolution in opposition to that matter. So it would be really up to the council if you would want to wait for that, or if you are
already getting letters. I got a letter from the Business Roundtable supporting it, and I wrote it back and I said pound sand. I professionally pound sand. Yeah. That's all I have, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So the only question that I had, it did say in the report that it would be reviewed annually and we could revisit if there is for some reason some topic that comes up that we can't fit into one of these buckets. What would be the process for getting consensus on that to move forward?
I would say we could revert back to what has been the practice previously, which was that I could draft a letter and circulate it to the council and ask if anyone has opposition or concerns. And then if there are any concerns, we can put it on a council agenda. Otherwise, I could forward that to the mayor for her consideration. The other option would be if it's something that is, I don't know, particularly contentious or I'm not sure, I can always put it on a council agenda for you all to consider. I think the process we've had has worked fairly well. But this is kind of just the flipping that over and being just a little bit more proactive about it. But I don't know, my sense is it's worked fairly well. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay. And then the other question that I had is with annual meetings with our state and federal legislators in the past, practice has been to kind of build agendas based on who's going to that meeting and what the topics would be at this time. Is there still going to be some flexibility in those meetings that we don't just come in with our, lobbyist list? Or does this resolution dictate that when we go into those meetings, this is the script and this is what we're doing and that's it?
Yeah, no, I don't think this is your script at all. I think you guys can completely set that agenda for those dialogues with those electeds.
All right, perfect. Any other questions of council? All right, I'm going to go ahead and open public comment.
No cards.
I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to council for discussion and action.
So I'm fine with adding what Councilmember Bash brought up in regards to the
Business Roundtable Initiative.
Thank you, Business Roundtable Initiative. I was going to say roundtable business. Maybe I'm thinking of pizza. Two things that I wanted to bring up also for the council's consideration to see if we wanted to consider adding to the legislative platform. One under item 2, public health. One of the things that we had a workshop on today was looking at the impacts of warehousing and logistics in our region. Wanted to see what my fellow council members thought about if there was any position we wanted to take on that in terms of, bills that might be coming out that could mitigate the effects of those on our communities. And then second, when I think about healthy communities, we have public safety on here, but I think one of the other pieces is the quality of life of our residents and looking at, any bills that come out of supporting mental health services and any other programming to provide to communities in terms of recreation. So health and public health in that sense that we would be supportive and also want to see those happening across the region.
Can you expand on your first part on, I guess what you're trying to reference is like distribution or trucking or air quality, and can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yes. So the thing with this is that it's kind of a double-sided coin, I think, because our first statement is retaining local control. For instance, there was a bill last year that was killed in a committee, but what it was trying to do was require warehousing and logistics centers, that there was a minimum buffer zone around sensitive areas, a daycare, a school, people's houses. So warehouses over a certain size, we're talking quite large ones and that are logistics, couldn't be built, right, within however many feet. And it wasn't even that huge amount of feet, but you couldn't just stick it next to, a neighborhood or an elementary school, which has been happening in our region. That's something that I would support, even though it's kind of counteractive to that local control piece, just because we're seeing that happen. So there might be bills that come up that would try to balance residents, neighborhoods, communities with these huge warehouses that are kind of going up all over the region. So I brought it up as a point of discussion because it's a big thing that's happening around, and I wanted to see. We can take no position on that and stick with local control. I know other cities, didn't write in support of that bill because their position was no, because it takes some bit of local control away. But for me, I don't see why you would want to put a 250,000, square foot warehouse next to a neighborhood or next to a school. I think there's a bigger issue at play. So I wanted to bring that up. Does that help? It's hard to see in a crystal ball what could come out. That's just the one that I saw that came out that they're looking to do, and specifically in the Inland Empire, because right now we're having such a huge proliferation of the issue. It's not as big of a issue other places. You could put your warehouse out far away and it's not impacting anybody, but that's not what's happening anymore. They really are impacting neighborhoods, residents, kids.
I agree with you on the impacts, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to give up an inch of local control. And that's kind of if it would diminish local control, then I wouldn't want to add to it. But I'm certainly aware and support you on the impacts of large distribution facilities. I'll leave it to my colleagues. I'd like to hear your input on it. It's kind of that, yeah, but that's where I am right now.
Mayor Pro Tem.
In reference to the what we talked about with the warehouse at the workshop, and that I think we all have a certain disdain for Sacramento trying to tell us what to do. I mean, that's why we're a charter city and that. But there are other agencies that regulate that, and one of them is CARB. CARB will regulate. I mean, they just like on a roadway project on a freeway, they have certain requirements. If you use a mile of freeway or if you use half a mile of freeway, the difference they make and the hoops they make go through it. And the same thing they do with their air regulations in the state. We're going to see more of them come through, and they're going to be addressing the warehouse issue sooner than later. And for them, that state agency, we're not going to get around because they use air as their thing. And I agree with you, Catherine. It's no one wants. You see that no one wants to do that, but I agree with Greg. Is we don't want to put more, give these guys more ammunition for a state control over our local jurisdiction. So it's a catch-22 situation. But I just see that as where do we do where is this a place to do that in this legislative planning? I think what we need to do then is research and see how far that goes and what impact we can have on that. We thought we were going to have an impact when we did it tonight. We got rid of the JPA for the WC. We thought we were going to have an impact and work with the energy, and we found out that CPUC has more control than we ever will be. So we couldn't even adjust that for us. So I think if we want to do that, we'll go through, we can add. I agree with you. We should add some kind of deal on there so we protect our areas, especially our areas. But I think we probably ought to do a little more homework on that one. Just a thought before we put it down a recommendation. I agree we could do, and the sheriff's department, we have what, and I think they still have it, the quality of life situation. We can look at those as a quality of life issue, if anything else.
Councilmember Bash.
I'm actually tempted to agree with Catherine, but I guess the issue for me.
You can give in to your temptation.
We talk about local control, and the thing is that local control, I was reading an editorial this morning, and it talked about local control and NIMBYs, and they were talking about housing and all that stuff. Local control isn't about councils. It's about the person at the podium. The entire Constitution is based on the person from the bottom up standing there. And so, as much as I'm tempted, we're trying to protect the person who stands there and works to get us elected to represent their point of view. Even the housing crisis, in my view, is not worth the loss of local control, particularly when proof is now being shown that the stuff they're passing doesn't work. It doesn't work. SB 9, SB 10, SB 35 are disasters, and they're just making a few people rich. And the cost is the person that stands at that podium has lost their voice. So even the And people, that's what they mean by big government. It's not about NIMBYs. It's about people who came together, got people elected, and created a community they wanted to live in. Now, unfortunately, they always jump to, well, segregation and redlining. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the zoning. And as Colin pointed out to me today, our Constitution actually says, the California State Constitution says, we control zoning as a local entity. And it's totally ignored by these people and what they're doing. So if we do that, that person loses. And as I've said before, we're the only country in the world that starts there. We're the only one. Everybody else had kings and monarchs. So as tempted as I am, Catherine, I have to agree that the, quote, local control is something that I want to protect. And then the other thing is, should we talk about, I don't want to go on the, I know we kind of are quiet about the districting thing. I think as time goes on, we're realizing that districts are really kind of destroying cities in a way, and they are, because they're breaking the cities up. Now, and I'm not talking about the big cities, but a city our size, but we've hesitated to kind of come out because we didn't want to become a target. So is that something we should add to our, as bills come down, maybe do we continue to sort of fly under the radar and hope one of the lawyers gets hit by a truck?
I think we could definitely say that we support at-large elections and leave it at that. There's the CVRA, the California Voting Rights Act, is sort of settled right now, and I don't anticipate any legislation, but there might be.
Well, what we're hearing is that as soon as the Santa Monica thing is settled, they're going to start opening that can of worms again, and we know we're a target.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court hasn't ruled yet on Santa Monica, right? That's still out. Well, that we could certainly add that support for at-large.
I just don't know if we want to go on the radar. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to put that in here. And then I just want to finish the little, and I appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts on the local control, but you said that the power is the person at the podium, and some of these laws get made because the person at the podium isn't getting listened to at their city. And so they're going to their assembly member and they're saying, hey, we've got a huge problem. Please, state, do something about it. And so sometimes that's where that is coming from. And so, that person too then is trying to make a difference for those people and protect those people.
My statement to that is that person going around their local control and their city council is in the minority. And because you have a supermajority now, they have the ability to do that, but they're not representing the majority of their community. And that's the problem with that. And I totally understand where you're coming from, but I fundamentally disagree. That person needs to go through this body. That's how our Constitution's designed, from the bottom up.
I would disagree with you on that, but, well, state law always supersedes. It doesn't matter whatever state you're in. There's always a battle for local control. In Arizona right now, it's happening over short-term rentals because you can't ban them. But in the case of warehousing, right, there are, when you get a bunch of people showing up at a council and they feel unheard, those people are trying to make a difference for their community because there are a lot of issues that are happening with the logistics industry in the IE. So, yes, there's local control, but there's always, it's a two-sided coin because at the same time, there are a lot of regulations that keep us safe, that keep our air clean, that keep our water clean, and that provide us with the communities that we're blessed to live in. So, I certainly wanted to bring that up because I hear from our residents, they are concerned about these things. So appreciate the conversation.
Any other comments from council? I think just speaking for myself in general terms, I think there's flexibility in having these buckets or kind of designations of legislative kind of priorities so that if something, does come along that we potentially can have the flexibility to fit it in a bucket. And I also see that there's things that will come forward that maybe fit in more than one bucket where we have that flexibility as well. And I'm hoping that when we get to specific items that we're able to, through zoning and codes and that kind of thing, protect our community and our residents through that as well. And for me, a lot of what we do is going to fall into that local control kind of topic or ideal. So that's where I would be at that. Other discussion, council action. We have a motion and a second.
Mayor, may I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
So, with regard to there were several changes suggested by Councilmember Bash and Councilmember Alleman. Just clarification, are we including any of those? Are we not including any of those? We had business roundtable, opposing council districts, something about warehouse logistics, and adding mental health and services for recreation to the public safety piece. So I count 4.
Right.
Sounds like the majority of the council was not interested in adding the warehouse logistics one at this point. But sounds like you were good on business roundtable. No to the council districts after you talked about it, right?
I think if I heard correctly, it's probably be our preference not to have that in writing.
Leave that out
somewhere.
That would be a hard no for me. But I think if I understand you correctly, Robin, even the business roundtable, there's still room in these categories if we want to address any of Kevin's concerns or Catherine's concerns. I.e.
That's
the
my
buckets.
impression, but I'm
Yeah, because
one
I'm
of 5.
thinking about it. The reality is the trucking thing has actually become, it isn't just a local issue. It's actually, I mean, part of our big problem is Paris, Moreno Valley, Fontana. So I think that the more I think about it, it goes beyond local control. It goes to people banding together to try to stop some of the pollution that's coming from some of these trucks. So is there some way we can fit that in then? Because that's a bigger issue than just us.
I'm thinking more of just why have such a list that eventually we're not going to know what's on it. I think that there's room in these categories if Catherine sees something that we need to address. We talk about it and address it. You see something on your business roundtable.
Okay.
Want to bring it up? We talk about it. Otherwise, we're just going to have pages of, I don't know what's in there. Good discussion brings good results. So I would think Catherine sees something that, maybe we need to send off a letter or talk to our lobbyists about. To me, that would be a much more efficient way to approach it.
Other comments on that topic? Yes.
I think your discussion with Catherine and what we're all discussing, it probably comes back to the overreaching priority of local control, support home rule and authority of charter cities, and oppose, and D, oppose any action to seek to reduce city authority. That would be our authority, and I think that encompasses that in there, and where we can get specific about the traffic, or we can go into the social, economic, and then the infrastructure where we talk about I thought it was in our roads, funding for sources for streets and other infrastructure maintenance. It's probably look at a highway or that type of a roadway or transportation corridors, because that's the bottom line with that we have issues, and we brought this up in our transportation commission meeting, was the fact that our corridors are not designed to handle all the warehousing and truck traffic that are associated with it. So we can add something with that. So it covers that.
We're addressing the tax issue, so. Yeah.
Does that provide clarity?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I know Greg was thinking we could get a long list, but that's why the list came. Do we want to add anything to the list? So the discussion was, should we add any of these 4 things, right? Like, we're not going to keep going and have, a 10 volume, every specific thing, but or do we want to, if the consensus is no, and if they come up, we talk about them, or if the consensus is, yeah, we can add those 3 things, it's still going to be a 1.5 page list. So I mean, that's the will of the
I can live with a page
company.
and a half. I would say no, but we can talk about things. If that's the direction you were asking.
Yeah, and I would agree, especially if this is going to be like a handout that we're providing to, local electeds and our state representatives and stuff, that kind of keep it more general in terms. And then when these other things come up, that the staff or us bring it to our colleagues for discussion at a public meeting.
That's a good point.
So we do have a first and a second. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I think we're ready for a vote.
Councilmember Newton, I'm still not getting your vote. Oh,
Got
there
it.
it goes. It went.
You got it.
All right, motion passed 5-0.
All right, very good. Thank you. Moving on to item 6C, restructuring of the COVID-related loan and grant programs. I will have our city manager give that report as well.
Thank you, Mayor. So yes, this is an item to consider restructuring the existing COVID-related loan and small business grant programs into a new small enterprise assistance loan program in support of economic development. So I won't completely recap the staff report, as I know you've had a chance to read it, but these programs were created by the council really in response to COVID. And so as the COVID pandemic is sort of subsiding and becoming just COVID illness all the time, we thought it was appropriate to start having a conversation. So at the very first meeting of the new Economic Development Working Group, we sort of raised this issue, and the group just said, yeah, we're interested in this. This makes sense to us. So we were able to come back at a recent meeting in the last couple of weeks and talk about a new version. So if you look, essentially what we're proposing to do is to take the funding that is currently unallocated from both programs, combine those two buckets of money into a single new bucket of money, and right now that's about $115,000, and create a new up to $15,000 micro loan program that's very similar to the SEAL program with some few tweaks. So the tweaks are that this new program would really have two focuses for businesses that are expanding in Norco. So they would be similar in that they're still small businesses that have been here for 2 years, 25 or fewer employees, but we would be looking to provide these microloans to businesses that really hit two of our important categories. One being businesses that generate sales tax, which is our number one most important source of revenue here in Norco. And then number two, businesses that engage in lines of business in support of our lifestyle. So agritourism, small business, small farmers, cottage food, folks that do equestrian related businesses, those would also be eligible for our program. So we discussed these. They're very similar to the prior programs, as I've mentioned. And again, I don't want to go through them ad nauseum on the requirements. One thing that we did think was interesting, kind of armchair quarterbacking what we did before, is the prior loans do not require and actually even allow any payments during the term. The loans have to be paid in full or and not paid till you can pay in full. So under the new program, we would work with the applicant to develop an amortization schedule. So there's regular ongoing payments made during the term of the loan, which is just prudent financial planning, we think, and the committee agreed. So those are sort of the major overviews. I did get to talk again to the Economic Development Working Group on February 6th on the program. They were in favor of ending the current programs, creating this new microloan program, and really felt good about kind of those two targeted groups, and adding some loan requirements. There was some debate about whether or not to make whether or not nonprofits should be eligible for these loans. And we didn't reach consensus about that issue. The proposal here is to not provide them for nonprofits, but that might be something the council would want to discuss. staff's recommendation is we make it eligible for for-profit enterprises at this time, given that that's really our focus of economic development and we have limited funds available. So the other thing I'll note is that in the future, if the council so desires, we could allocate additional funds to this program. This is $115,000 is a good start. And we could certainly allocate additional funds if you so chose to do that in the future. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions, interested in your feedback on the proposal.
All right, we will move on to council questions. Councilmember Alleman, any questions? Councilmember Bash, any questions?
Just one on the nonprofits. What was the counterpoint in the debate?
I think that some folks felt that some of the nonprofits in town are really in support of rural living, agricultural lifestyles. We have some nonprofits that do some of that work in town. And so some of that might be appropriate to use for their expansion. Additional, that might be one. Other people felt, no, while that's great, they do great work, we really want to focus on actual businesses that are generating profit in the community, jobs in the community, so forth. So I think both are valid. It's really just a matter of what we feel is the best use of our very limited dollars.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Hoffman? Okay, I do have one question, talking about folks repaying the loans and that money would go into this fund. Do we have any outstanding balances now that would potentially go into that fund?
Yes, so all the balances are outstanding. There have been no payments made because no payments are taken and no one's paid in full. So there's $135,000 that could come back into this will come back at some point. So on that too, the committee was interested, and we're interested in staff in talking to those loan recipients and seeing if they are interested in a modification to their promissory note that would permit those payments. We feel like that would, if I were the business owner, I'd like to be making payments. So we're going to revisit that with Lisette's team, Julie. We're going to reach out to them and see if they're interested. Obviously, they're not obligated to do that. They have a promissory note, but if they would like to, we feel like that would be a good thing. So.
Okay, perfect. No other questions of staff? All right, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and open public comment. Any cards?
No cards.
Close public comment and bring it back to council for discussion and action. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Ro. I sit on this committee, and it's scary that the way it was set up that they can't make their payments. And they're sitting there, and it's a one big lump sum payment at the end. And maybe it was done that way when it initially started, but that most of them have maxed out with that $20,000 loan, and so there's $135,000 out there, and hoping they're going to repay it back. But I think adding the payment plan in there gives them something to look forward to. Okay, I get a couple of years, then I can start making payments on it, and not this big balloon payment. So I agree with what the committee did on this. Thank you.
Other comments or discussion from council?
No, I would just say that I agree with the staff's recommendation. I'm on the commission as well, and while definitely value the work that our nonprofits do, at this point we do have very limited dollars, and the focus of the funds at this point, now that we're changing the program, it's not so much to bridge a gap for organizations that it originally was purposed for COVID. We're looking at economic development, and so we're looking at sales tax revenue, and then of course we're looking at businesses that fit in with rural living. And so I think there's some flexibility with that as well. And if more funds become available or we don't have any applicants, then we can always come back and revisit the program and make changes as needed.
Right. I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Go ahead and vote. Motion passed 5-0.
All right, perfect. Moving on to item number 7, our council and staff communication. Does city staff have any? Chad.
Madam Mayor and Council, wanted to give you a quick update on the recent Road, River Drive trail closure we had to do recently. We got notified on February 9th that the city identified a slopage drive, excuse me, I keep saying that, Hillside Avenue, adjacent to an Edison pole. Placed delineation around that impacted area. RKA sent out Converse consultants to review the site and provide an assessment and recommendation. This is the area that's basically been scarfed out adjacent to the trail. Kind of shows you it's already past the Edison pole. Edison has been out there, reviewed the area. Right now they feel that their structure is point, but they're going to keep an eye on it as we are also. Are on both sides of the trail to make sure we keep people out. We're going to modify this in the future to kind of shorten it up a little bit, so that we probably have a gap so folks can go around it. We'll put an opening. Pretty long jaunt. So real quick, as far as where we're at this point, Converse has indicated the following. Short-term fix to repair this slippage area. Not just so where it slipped. Recommend the trail to remain closed indefinitely. One of the things we're looking to do, they develop all the options that we could decide which direction we want to go. Plans and what options we have. So they have a concern with the area that is slipping, that it can continue on. They don't see an immediate cause of why it's happening, but it could continue and go towards the roadway, so they are recommending the city look at potentially dropping in large rocks or material into that area to at least stabilize the sandy area that's basically sliding. So we are working on that process now to kind of figure out our plan. And that's only to abate it. Converse is currently preparing a proposal for a geotechnical study. Options we want to do as far as authorize them to do that study. Staff is working on a cost estimate to add the rocks as we discussed. Lastly, staff will reduce that closure area, push those barricades farther in, closer to the slide. That so folks can hop out, go to the street, breathe. We're going to add a lot of signage that says stay out of the closure. Caution, like we've done in other where it's a lot of signage advising people where to proceed. Fortunately, we've already had people going through the area, tape up and other things, putting up hardened stuff in that area.
Does anybody have any questions for Chad? So go Councilmember Newton.
Is this, all these costs going to be burdened by the city, or do we have any participation like with Corps of Engineers or, like anything we did with the bluff stabilization? And then years ago, the slope protection that we did at, let's say River Drive and near the freeway.
Initially, yes, we would certainly have the burden of developing our plan and whatnot, but obviously we're going to start already having those discussions with flood control to see if there's something we can do as far as developing another project. But obviously that would be a much longer project and how it would be done, but with the idea that have maybe Army Corps help build it like they did on the other project and do a larger, much bigger revetment, higher slope area. But those potential if we that occurred and get state funding for any damage that occurred. We're going to look at anything we can to try to get funding from any source we can.
Before we go on, if I can add, Councilmember, we are going to file a claim. We're going to make a damage claim with County OES for this. We don't know if it's storm related or not, but we're going to put a claim in, And if it is, then that would be 75% reimbursement by FEMA. But we don't know. So in the absence of not knowing, we're going to make the claim, and then we'll let the geotechnical guide and tell us if it is storm related.
And with the geotechnical, obviously you're not looking at this as just a one-off, that this could impact the entire slope area, right?
Correct.
Or portions thereof.
Yes, they've identified there's already areas they see that are beyond this one section, and they'd be looking at it as a whole house solution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chad. Thanks, Lori.
If I can, you know, this same thing happened 68, 69, Kevin, where it fell in there. It's right there in the same area. It just all along that. That's where the chain link fence was actually put up there, so that along the north side of River, so that people wouldn't drive off of it. So that whole thing has been there. I mean, there's a lot of kinds of solutions that were talked about, what to do with it. That's when the Army Corps of Engineers stabilized the front section of that. They didn't go back any further, but that's in that area we're in. And part of the thing that came up was to, instead of having these straight trails going down, is to do switchback trails along the bluff, build it up, do switchbacks. So we do it. But it seems like we get a little rain or worse than that, the more construction we have up there along in that area, guys are right along Pedley and that vibration, that's all sand. It just pumps through, and you know that. That's what your engineer is going to tell you, the same thing. The engineers look back in those old ones, the same thing they said back then. It's just not stable, and that's why they closed it. Didn't that house, do we have a house phone there? 2, yeah. That's the history that's there. Done.
All right, thank you, Chad. Any other city staff? All right, city attorney.
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, city manager. All right, any colleagues up here?
Yeah, just we had the mayor's meeting today.
Thank you for going.
Yeah, except the 2 topics that we're going to talk about, the housing issue and the Brown Act, as far as the new changes, those people didn't show up. So we had a friendly discussion on with Blythe's problem over there with the Chuckawalla and Ironwood. So I know you're working on it, and so it was about the prison closure. So we had a discussion with the other mayors and council members who were in attendance to get them updated with that. Blythe is really, economically, that will kill their city to do that. So just one of the things we're seeing. So thank you for taking that on.
Just the last few weeks, extracurricular activities just been real busy with barn dance and Hall of Fame and the post office dedication. And I wanted to compliment Kevin and Robin for your speeches at the post office dedication. They were heartfelt and made me proud of both of you.
All right. If it's all right with my colleagues, we heard earlier this evening that Coach Campbell, Gary Campbell, passed away on Sunday, a formative person for generations of Norconians, both on the field and off. So I'd like to close the meeting this evening in his honor. So if you'll join me in a moment of silence for Coach Campbell. Meeting adjourned 9:16. Thank you.